Hey, I'm Alex, and welcome to Hallucination. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. The clock says 6:58, 2 minutes until bedtime. Daniel doesn't like when I'm late for bedtime. My thoughts are all jumbled up today. The medicine makes my head feel like it's stuffed with cotton, like someone shoved wet newspaper into my skull and let it harden there. I can hear Daniel in the kitchen. The clinking of dishes sounds like tiny bones breaking. He made spaghetti tonight. Spaghetti with meatballs. I like the meatballs. I think I've always liked meatballs, even before the accident. Sometimes it's hard to remember what I liked before. Sometimes I wake up tasting blood and can't remember why. I should get ready. Daniel doesn't like when I'm not in bed. When the clock turns to 7 o'clock, he says it makes Mr. Jax upset, and nobody wants Mr. Jax upset. I've never met Mr. Jax. Daniel says he comes to our house late at night and checks on things, make sure everything is safe. Daniel says Mr. Jax knows what's best for us. Daniel says Mr. Jax has plans for me. When Daniel talks about Mr. Jax, his eyes change. They get darker, emptier, like something crawls behind them. The doctors told me I have, what did they call it? Traumatic something, brain injury, from the accident. Sometimes I can think just fine, like now. Other times I can't remember my own name. The words get stuck. The thoughts won't connect right. I get confused about what year it is, what day, where I am. Sometimes I see shadows moving in the corners of my room, shifting, watching, waiting. I used to be different. Before the pills, before the accident. I was a teacher, math teacher, high school. I taught algebra and geometry. I remember the smell of chalk and the sound of the bell. I remember Lisa, my wife, and Tommy, my first son, my boy. I remember their smiles, their laughter. I can still hear their screams sometimes, in my dreams, in the walls, when I'm alone. They're gone now. The accident. 2 years? 3? Time is slippery for me now. Daniel, Lisa's son from her first marriage, moved in after. Said he'd take care of me. Said he'd help. I adopted him when he was 12. After I married Lisa, he never called me dad though. Always Greg, his voice always cold. Clinical, like he was examining a specimen. The lock clicks from outside my bedroom door. 7 p.m. sharp. The sound makes my skin crawl. I hear Daniel's voice through the door, muffled and wrong, like it's coming through water or meat. Good night, Greg. Did you take your evening pills? His voice sounds far away even though he's just behind the door. Yes, I lie. The little blue and white pills are under my tongue. They taste like chemicals and dread. I'll spit them out later. I don't like how they make me feel, like I'm underwater. Can't think, can't remember. On my ceiling, there are terrible things. They crawl upside down. They come in from a crack above the door. Do they know Mr. Jax? Good. Mr. Jax will be here soon. He says you need to stay in your room tonight. All night. Don't try to come out, okay? Remember what happened last time? I do remember. Sorta. Things get mixed up sometimes. I got thirsty and tried the door. It was locked. I kept pulling on it. Daniel came. He was crying, but his eyes were dry. Said Mr. Jax was angry. Daniel had a bruise the next day. A perfect handprint wrapped around his throat. Said it was my fault, but I was locked in here all night. How could it be my fault? Okay, Daniel. I'll stay. The words feel thick in my mouth. Hard to talk sometimes, like my tongue belongs to someone else. Sleep well, Greg. Mr. Jax is looking forward to seeing you. His footsteps go away. They sound heavier than they should, like someone much larger is walking away. I sit on my bed, look around. This room is my whole world now. TV, books with big letters, water bottle, bucket for bathroom. I hate that bucket, hate it. But Daniel says Mr. Jax doesn't let me use the real bathroom at night. There are scratches on the wall. I don't remember making and stains on the ceiling that look like faces when the light hits them just right. I look at my puzzle book, the one with pictures of animals and words hidden in a grid. Daniel says these are good for my brain, says they'll help me get better, but I think I'm getting worse. Yesterday, all the animals in the book were staring at me, their eyes following me across the room. The words start to swim on the page. I feel dizzy. The medicine. It's kicking in. The stuff I took this morning makes it hard to focus, makes the shadows in the corners grow longer, darker. But wait, I hear voices from the living room. Daniel's talking to someone. Another voice, deeper, older, raspy like sandpaper on bone. I try to listen. My legs feel wobbly, but I manage to get to the door, press my ear against it. The wood feels cool, unnaturally cool, like it's sucking the warmth from my skin. He's secured for the night. The deep voice must be Mr. Jack's. It sounds wrong, too deep, too hollow, like it's coming from somewhere very dark and very old. Yes, Daniel's voice. Just like you said. Good. Has he been behaving? Not really. Tuesday was bad. He kept calling me Tommy. Then he started crying, asking where Lisa was, saying he wanted to see her. He scratched himself until he bled, said something was under his skin. That's concerning. We might need to adjust his dosage again. The stronger stuff. The one that makes him see us as we truly are. I move away from the door. My heart is going fast. Too fast, like it's trying to escape my chest. Adjust my dosage. No more pills. Last time they changed my medicine, I couldn't wake up. Slept and slept. Couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake. Saw things standing over my bed, watching me, touching me with hands that felt like wet leather. I go back to bed, pull the blanket up. It feels safe under here. Through my window, I can see the moon. Full moon, big and bright, too bright, unnatural. The moon helps me sometimes, helps my thoughts line up right, like puzzle pieces clicking together. But tonight it looks wrong, like it's watching me, judging me. I remember things when the moon is full. Remember Lisa's smile. Remember Tommy's baseball games. Remember adopting Daniel when he was 12. Remember how he watched me, always watching, never smiling, never calling me dad. I remember the way he'd stand in doorways just watching us eat, the way animals would go quiet when he walked by. I remember the accident, the car going too fast. Couldn't stop it, brakes didn't work. The tree coming closer and closer, Lisa screaming. Tommy in the back seat, the sound of metal folding, of glass breaking, of something laughing. I remember the hospital. The police officer, young guy with kind eyes. He said the brake lines were cut. Someone cut them, but they didn't know who. I remember how uncomfortable he looked when Daniel visited, how he wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes. I remember Daniel coming to live with me after the funeral. I was still in a wheelchair then. Head all bandaged up, he said he'd take care of me. Said Mr. Jax would help us both. I remember how cold his hands were when he touched me, like he'd been keeping them in ice water. Mr. Jax, the grief counselor. That's what Daniel said. But I've never seen him, never signed papers, never had therapy. And why? Why does he only come at night? Why do the lights flicker when his name is mentioned? Why do I sometimes hear him moving in the attic during the day when Daniel says he only comes at night? There's laughing from the living room, TV sounds, explosions, gunfire. But underneath it, something else. A wet, slithering sound, like something huge dragging itself across the floor. I think I fell asleep. My eyes open. Room is dark. Just moonlight. Clock says 2:17. What woke me up? A sound from outside my door. A scratching sound, like claws on wood. Footsteps. Heavy, uneven footsteps. I try not to breathe too loud. The doorknob moves, turns, but the lock stops it. Something pushes against the door. Something heavy. The wood creaks, bending inward slightly. He's sleeping. Mr. Jack's voice, just outside my door. It doesn't sound human up close. Too deep. Too hollow. like it's coming from the bottom of a well filled with mud and teeth. Should be. The risperidone and lorazepam knock him out pretty good. Daniel sounds tired, afraid. Good. I brought the papers. Once we get him declared legally incompetent, we can access the insurance money. The house, too. Insurance, money, my brain feels foggy, but something about this feels important. Wrong. How much longer will this take? Daniel asks. His voice trembles. Not long now. His condition is getting worse, just as we planned. Those pills I gave you are working perfectly. The brain damage from the accident gives us a good cover, but these medications will make him a complete vegetable soon, and then he's mine. All mine. My stomach hurts. Pills? They're making me worse on purpose? And what does he mean? I'll be his. I don't know. Sometimes he seems okay. Like today, he remembered it was Friday spaghetti night without me reminding him. There's a sound, wet, meaty, like someone got hit with something heavy. Then, something strange happens. I hear shuffling, and Daniel's voice changes, gets deeper, becomes Mr. Jack's voice. Don't get soft now, the deeper voice says. It echoes strangely, like it's coming from everywhere and nowhere. That normal Daniel voice, whimpering, "No, sir." My brain is slow, but this is important. That second voice, it came from Daniel, not from someone else. There is no Mr. Jacks. It's Daniel. Just Daniel, just Daniel. Talking to himself, making a different voice. But then, who made that scratching sound? Who pushed against the door? Why does the house creak at night like something huge is moving through it? The medicine fog tries to pull me under, but I fight it. Fight to understand. More shuffling sounds. Then Daniel, normal voice, strained and fearful. I'll increase his dosage tomorrow. Then deeper voice, but different now. Wetter, with a gurgling quality that makes my skin crawl. Good. I want him completely helpless by next week. Just a drooling idiot who can't even feed himself. Ready for the transition. The words hurt. Make me want to cry, but I hold it in. What transition? What's going to happen to me? Footsteps go away down the hall, but they don't sound right. Too many of them, like 3 or 4 people walking in perfect sync. My hands shake, can't make them stop. The pills, blue ones, white ones, yellow ones. Daniel gives them to me. Morning, noon, night. They make my brain slow, make me forget things, make me stupid. Make me see the things that hide in the dark, the things with too many eyes and not enough skin. No, I see them when I don't take the pills. They're real. I know it. I think they are hiding from me. Mr. Jacks. Who is he? We all know him. I think so. He's here at this house. I look at my water bottle. Did he put more medicine in there? Probably. The water looks wrong. Too thick. Too dark. Daniel isn't helping me. He's hurting me, making me sick. There's no Mr. Jacks, just Daniel talking to himself. Like he has 2 people inside him, or something inside him, wearing him like a costume. I try to get out of bed. My legs are wobbly, like walking on jello. I make it to the window, look out. Too high up, 2nd floor, can't jump. And something moves in the yard below. Something big that shouldn't be there. Something that looks up at me with eyes that reflect the moonlight like mirrors. Door is locked from outside. I'm stuck here until 7 a.m. when Daniel brings breakfast and more pills. More things to make me forget, to make me compliant, to prepare me. The moonlight helps me think, helps me remember. I remember the insurance. Big policy on Lisa and Tommy. Got money when they died, and there's more money if I die. The mortgage insurance, my retirement money from teaching, my pension. Daniel can get it all. If I'm declared incompetent, if I can't take care of myself. A thought comes, clear as a bell. Did Daniel cut the brake lines? Did he kill Lisa and Tommy on purpose? Was it part of his plan? First them, now me. I look around my room, not a bedroom. A cell, a cage, a place of preparation. I have until morning to figure something out. My brain still works sometimes. when the medicine wears off, when the moon is bright, because now I know part of the truth about Mr. Jax. He's not real. He's a voice in Daniel's head. Or maybe Mr. Jax is real. I know there's something else here too. Something that comes in the night. Something Daniel is afraid of. Something he's working for. Something that wants me. My tongue feels the pills I hid there. I spit them into my hand, hold them tight. I noticed something on the wall I didn't see before, scratched into the paint with fingernails. Words in Lisa's handwriting. He's not Daniel anymore. When 7 a.m. comes, I'll be ready. I might be damaged, might be slow, but I'm not stupid. But I wonder, what do I need to do to get Mr. Jax to let me leave? Mr. Jax, he is it. The one who scratches at my door at night. The one who makes the house groan? The one who waits in the dark with patience that feels ancient and hungry? Not anymore. I can stand up to Mr. Jax. Update. It's nearly 7 a.m. I can hear movement outside my door. Footsteps. Too many footsteps for one person. I'd been up all night, found more writing hidden in this room. Under the carpet, behind the dresser. Lisa and Tommy were trying to warn me. Daniel isn't Daniel. Hasn't been for years. Something else wears him now. Something old. Something patient. Something that's been collecting our family one by one. My son Tommy left behind a drawing of Mr. Jax. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. The door is opening now. Time to find out what Mr. Jax really looks like. The previous tenant left a note under my floorboards. I should have listened. June 12th. I found the note while unpacking boxes in my new apartment. A floorboard near the bedroom closet was loose, and when I lifted it, there it was, a yellowed scrap of paper with handwriting so frantic the pen had torn through in places. If you hear crying from the walls, do not investigate. It's not a child. It remembers faces. I laughed. Some goth kid's idea of a joke. I figured. I crumpled it up and threw it away. Big mistake. June 17th. The first time I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. 3:07 a.m. The exact same time every night, I'd learn later. A child's sobs, muffled but unmistakable, coming from inside the west wall, not the pipes. I checked, not a neighbor. The walls are solid concrete, just this weeping that made my ribs ache with how real it sounded. I pressed my ear to the wall. The crying stopped, then so close it made my skin crawl. I see you too. I barely slept after that. June 19th. I confronted the super today. Kids in the building? I asked casually. He stiffened. No. Why? When I described the crying, his coffee cup rattled in its saucer. That unit was empty since Miss Lasky, he muttered. She kept complaining about noises before she transferred. What happened to her? He just tapped his temple and walked away. Transferred. Right. June 22nd. The crying is getting louder. Closer. Last night, it didn't come from the wall. It came from just behind my headboard. I lay frozen as tiny fingernails, scratched the plaster, inches from my skull. Something whispered. You looked. Now I know your face. I bolted upright. The room was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps. I told myself I imagined it. I didn't sleep after that. June 24th. I pried up the floorboard today. The note wasn't alone. Beneath it lay a Polaroid of a smiling woman, Miss Lasky, standing in the same bedroom. Someone had scratched out her eyes with what looked like a child's fingernails. The back read, "It takes the eyes first." That night I slept with the lights on. It didn't help. June 25th. I did some digging. No reports of a Miss Lasky and missing persons. No police records tied to my address. It's like she never existed, but I know she did. I found something else too. A news article, 1998. An apartment fire, a little girl trapped behind a wall, wedged inside an old dumbwaiter shaft. The fire department found her too late. The article didn't say how she got there, but it did say this: she was found with her hands over her eyes. June 27th, 3:07 a.m. The crying came again. I couldn't take it anymore. "What do you want?" I whispered. The response wasn't set in the wall. It was right behind me, in a voice like wet paper tearing. "Your eyes work better than hers did." I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty, but the air felt thick, charged, wrong. The closet door creaked open by itself. I ran. June 28th. I'm writing this from a motel. The crying followed me here. It's 2:56 a.m. In 11 minutes, I'll hear it again. I turned the TV up loud to drown out the sound. I triple-checked the locks, but I know that won't stop it. I keep seeing things in the motel mirror, dark shapes in the corners, eyes missing from my reflection. I don't know what it wants, but I think I understand now. It doesn't need the apartment. It needs someone to see it. I just hope it doesn't remember what I look like. I had lived in the same small apartment for 3 years. I knew every creaky floorboard, every annoying draft, and every spot where the paint peeled just a little too much. However, one morning, as I walked down the short hallway toward the kitchen, I stopped. There, on the left-hand side of the hall, where there had always been a blank wall, stood a door. It was old, its wood splintering, its handle rusted. The paint was peeling, revealing layers of colors underneath. Gray, red, black. I touched it, half expecting my hand to pass through, as if this were some hallucination. But no, the wood was real, rough under my fingers. I stepped back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This door hadn't been there yesterday. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, sent it to my landlord, and then called him. "There's a door in my hallway," I said, my voice unsteady. A pause, then laughter. "Of course there is. Every apartment has doors." "No," I yelled, glancing at it again. This one wasn't set here before. It just appeared out of nowhere. My landlord sighed and with an annoyed tone asked, "Have you been drinking?" "I don't drink." And with clenched teeth I told him to just forget it. I hung up and stared at the door. I should just ignore it. That's what any sane person would do. But something about it felt wrong. The air around it was thick, heavy, like stepping into a room where someone had just been smoking. I leaned in closer. A faint scratching sound came from the other side. I jumped and stumbled back. Nope, absolutely not. I turned, grabbed my car keys, and left the apartment. Nightfall. I spent the whole day out, trying to convince myself that when I returned, the door would be gone. But when I stepped inside that evening, it was still there. Worse, it was slightly open. Darkness seeped from the crack, thick and unmoving. The air smelled stale, like old books and damp earth. I should leave, move out, call an exorcist. But instead, I found myself stepping forward. My fingers brushed the door, and it swung inward with a low groan. Beyond it was not another room, not the other side of my apartment, but a hallway, a long, impossibly dark hallway. Something in that darkness shifted. I felt my breath hitch as I saw movement, shapes that weren't quite human, too tall, too thin, their limbs stretching unnaturally. Then the whispering began. It wasn't a language I knew or had ever heard before, but I understood it all the same. "Come inside." I staggered back and slammed the door shut. My chest heaved. For a long time there was silence. Then from the other side, something knocked. Once, twice, then a slow, deliberate third time. I never opened the door again. But every night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I would hear the knocking. And every night the door opened just a little wider. Growing up, I lived in a pretty Christian household. Parents reading Bible stories to me as I fell asleep, grandparents taking me to church every Sunday, and other things in a similar vein. As I got older, I started to move away from religion and started to look at the world through a more scientific lens. Now, though, I have reason to believe the Christian God does exist. Recently, I've been pretty bored with my life. Everything is moving at a snail's pace with no exciting events coming up. That's where I got the amazing idea to pray to God. It wasn't a normal prayer, though. Instead of thanking God for all my blessings and whatnot, I asked a singular favor. "God, please open my eyes. Allow me to see everything I wasn't supposed to." Allow me to see everything hiding among us. In Jesus' name, amen. At the time, I didn't think much would come of it. I peacefully went to sleep that night with my sanity intact and woke up the next morning with absolutely no change. I went about my normal Monday morning routine of chugging a coffee, eating breakfast, smoking a joint, and taking a shower in preparation for the day ahead. When I was locking my front door as I was leaving for work, I noticed a tall, sickly-looking figure standing at the tree line just across the street from my home. As soon as my gaze focused on the location of where the figure was supposed to be, it vanished. At that point, I chalked it up to my hair, getting in my eyes mixed with the fact that the sun had just started to rise and it was foggy, not even remembering the prayer I had made the night before. The rest of the day was uneventful, an average workday, and a long commute back home as expected. I arrived at home around dusk, dragging my feet along the concrete of my driveway out of exhaustion. When I got to my door, I noticed the same exact figure in the same exact location as it was this morning. Except this time when I focused my gaze on where it was, it didn't instantly vanish. Instead, it quickly did a sidestep-esque motion and darted out of view. I still hadn't remembered the prayer from the night before, but I was a little disturbed. The next morning, I followed the same routine without incident, and this time the figure wasn't observing me from the tree line. What did happen was objectively more horrifying, though. I got in my car and inserted the keys into the ignition as I checked my mirrors, and what I presume was the same figure from the previous day was standing right at the end of the driveway. This time I could get a good glimpse at its features before blinking and it disappearing. It was unearthly pale, almost glowing from the peaking sun shining down on its skin, with matted and messy hair, accompanied by its blank, dead eyes and its frown stretching down to its chin, showing off its chipped, yellow, jagged teeth off in the process. I was rightly terrified, shuffling to put my car in reverse, stomping on the gas doing so. I was contemplating seeing a psychiatrist before thinking back to 2 nights ago, when I prayed that prayer. The prayer inciting of what I now classified as a demon haunted my psyche for the rest of the day. As I arrived home, I rushed to my door and frantically unlocked it, not even checking my surroundings to see if the demon was waiting for me to arrive. Every room I entered, I turned the lights on. Even when exiting, I didn't turn them off. I even ended up sleeping with a nightlight next to my bed. The next day mostly went off without a hitch. No tree-line figures or car mirror demons today. When arriving back home, I chuckled at the thought of a demon stalking me of all people. That was until I attempted to sleep. As I was drifting off into unconsciousness, I heard 3 consecutive knocks on the window behind my bed. I jolted awake, looked at my window, and it had the writing, "Don't be afraid," engraved into it, but not from the outside. It was engraved from the inside. I was too scared to sleep in my bedroom, so I grabbed a pillow, the revolver sitting in my nightstand drawer, and proceeded to sleep on the couch. Even then, it took hours for me to fall asleep, and that was reflected by how groggy and tired I was upon waking up. As I entered the bathroom to brush my teeth and shower, the light was turned off, even though the previous night I had left it on. For a split second after the lights came on, I could see those same dead eyes staring directly into me through the mirror. I gasped and stumbled backwards, shaking with fear. As I got up, I could see the mirror. The demon was gone, but now it was inside my house, possessing it. With my deteriorating mental and physical condition, I should have called out sick to my job, but I couldn't bring myself to be in the same home as the thing that was stalking me. On my way to work, I called my friend Thomas to see if he wanted to come over and have a few drinks after I got off work, thinking it'd be a good way to ease my anxiety from this ordeal, and maybe if he could see it too, I'd prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. After work, I picked him up from his house, catching up on the drive to my place as it'd been a while since we talked. "So how do you like living alone? Doesn't it get lonely at some point?" Thomas inquired. "Yeah, it does. Why'd you think I invited you over?" I asked. "Because there's a demon stalking you, and you feel crazy," Thomas replied. I let my foot off the gas until we came to a stop. I looked over at Thomas, and his body was elongated, with his head turned at a sharp 90-degree angle to fit inside, almost like his neck was snapped. When I looked at his face, he had the exact dead eyes and teeth of the demon that had been stalking me, the same unearthly pale skin. Except in this instance, the demon wasn't frowning. It was smiling from ear to ear as its chapped lips dripped blood. I jumped out of the car and ran. I'm lost in a forest now, writing this with 1 bar of service and 2% battery. It has been 2 hours since I jumped out of the car, and it's pitch black besides the faint glow of the moon and my phone screen. No matter where I look, I see it in the corner of my eyes, and every time I blink, I hear a step being taken on the crunchy dead leaves below me. It's only getting closer. I'm not sure what it wants with me, but I don't imagine it's pretty. Is there any way to ward it off? Please, don't end up like me. Don't ask God to open your third eye. It will not end well. I stayed too late at the flea market, and now I know why they close at 3 p.m. I've always loved flea markets. There's something about them. Things left behind, forgotten, repurposed. That's why I was thrilled when I moved to Ashbrook and heard about Cooper's Market. It sat just outside town, tucked against a stretch of dense forest. It was open Tuesday to Sunday, from dawn until 3 p.m., without exception. I assumed the closing hours were caused by a city ordinance, or just something people had always done. But the more I asked, the more people avoided answering. Vendors packed up quickly, customers left without lingering, and by 3:05, the place was abandoned, as if it had never been there at all. The market was just down the road from my house. I'd been a few times, usually in the mornings, but I'd never stayed until closing. I wanted to know why they closed so early. Now I do. March 25th, 2:50 p.m. The air changed as closing time approached. Vendors stopped humoring browsers, shifting their attention to breaking down their stalls. No one told stragglers to leave, but the message was clear. I lingered at an antique stall, pretending to examine a set of brass keys. The woman behind the table, thin, weathered, watched me with an unreadable expression. She was wrapping small porcelain dolls in tissue paper, her hands moving fast. "Hey, how's it going?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She barely glanced up from the doll in her hands. "I'm doing great, sweetie." Her voice was kind but distant, polite in a way that felt automatic. She just kept wrapping, her fingers moving fast. I was just wondering, why does everyone pack up so early? Is it a city ordinance or something? Her hand stilled for half a second. When she spoke again, her voice was colder. "If you stir smart, you once did ask." She folded the last piece of tissue paper over the doll, tucking it in tightly. "We need to leave." She didn't look at me, just kept working, the rustling of paper suddenly sharper, more hurried. March 25th, 3 p.m. I hid inside an old camper van near the back of the lot, crouched behind dusty furniture through a small window. I watched the last vendors pull out onto the road in a slow procession, dust rising behind them. March 25th, 3:15 p.m. The lot was empty. For a long time, nothing happened. I sat still, listening to the wind move through the trees, the rustle of old tarps shifting in the breeze. The sun was still high, the air still warm. I pulled out my iPhone, scrolling mindlessly to pass the time, occasionally glancing up to check my surroundings. Everything looked the same, still, normal. I began to wonder if I'd fallen for some elaborate local prank. Time passed, maybe a couple hours, maybe more. My phone had died after being on it for so long. I can't be sure of the time exactly, but it was starting to get dark. The footsteps came first, soft, like someone walking barefoot through dry leaves, then closer, deliberate, a slow, cautious approach. I held my breath, straining to see outside the camper. Nothing. The lot was still empty, but the feeling was stronger now, like being watched through a window I couldn't find. At some point, the whispers began. Not words, not exactly, just a sound threaded through the air, somewhere between wind and speech. My name surfaced in it, over and over, stretched and pulled apart like something spoken through water. I stayed curled behind the furniture, pressing myself into the tightest space I could find. It felt like I was there forever. Then through the corner of a window, I saw it. Thin, motionless. At first, I thought it was a vendor who had forgotten to leave. But it was too still. The longer I looked, the more unnatural it seemed. Its limbs too long, its posture too rigid, like something standing the way it thought a person should. It didn't set move. Neither did it. Sometime later, I ducked lower, wedging myself between an old dresser and a rusted mini-fridge. The metal was cold against my back. I told myself I could wait it out, that whatever this was, it would go. Then I took a step. Slow, deliberate, not searching. It already knew where I was. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to stay still. Through the thin gap beneath the camper door, I could see its feet, long pale. Standing just outside. A pause. Then the lightest sound, so faint, I almost didn't notice it. A slow, deliberate tapping. Not a knock. Just the bare scrape of a fingernail against the metal, testing the surface. It dragged downward, slow and careful, then lifted only to tap again, softer this time, almost thoughtful, like it was waiting. Minutes passed, maybe more. The tapping stopped. The air sat heavy, thick with silence. Then from nowhere, a warmth stirred the back of my neck. Not a breeze, not movement, just heat. Faint, damp. My fingers curled against my leg. The camper door was shut. The window was latched. I stayed still. The warmth came again, closer this time. I felt a shift in the van, fabric dragging against wood, a weight settling, then a breath. Deep, controlled, right against my skin. Before I could react, something pressed against my spine. Light at first, just the barest touch through my shirt, then a nail, jagged and slow, tracing its way up my back, higher and higher. I ran. March 25th, approximately 8:40 p.m. I jumped into bed, pulling the blankets around me. Home felt safe. My boyfriend would be off soon. His shift runs from 2 to 10, just a couple of hours, and I wouldn't be alone. I tried to calm my breathing. The bedroom was quiet except for the sound of my cat, Henry, snoring at the foot of the bed. Then, a few light taps on the dresser. I was never alone. I grabbed Henry and ran. My keys were still in my pocket. I didn't turn the lights off. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove. The dresser was still shut. Now I'm at my brother's house. Henry is curled up beside me, and I can still feel my pulse in my throat. It's late now, and I am so tired after today, so I'm going to hop off. I'll update everyone soon if anything happens. Oh yeah, and I called my boyfriend. I told him not to go home. Told him to come straight here. I don't know if I can go back. Would it even make a difference? It was a hot summer night, and I was getting ready to sleep when my phone rang. I walked over to the table and saw it was my chief. I picked it up, but before I could say anything, his voice blasted through the speaker. "Yusef got a report. A family is drowning. Get to the beach now." Then the call ended. I tossed the phone onto my bed, yanked on my lifeguard shorts, and sprinted out the door. I jumped in my car and floored it. In 5 minutes, I was at the beach. My colleagues were already there. I could hear screaming, voices coming from the sea. Without hesitation, the chief pointed and told us to go in. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight into the water. The sea was pitch black, wavy, cold. The kind of cold that hits you so hard your brain blanks out. My colleague Charles was beside me as we swam toward the sounds. The waves kept slamming into us. We could barely catch a breath between them. We hit a short calm, just a few seconds. "Can you hear it, Charles?" I shouted. "No," he yelled back. "What do we do?" "Keep swimming toward the noise." So I dunked my head and kept going. The last place we stood heard anything. We had to get there, but another massive wave hit us. Hard. I was underwater longer than before, and when I surfaced, gasping, Charles was gone. "Charles! Charles, where are you?" I shouted again and again, but there was nothing. No sound, just water and waves. As long as Charles was with me, I wasn't scared, but now, alone in the dark sea, being thrown around like a rag doll by invisible walls of water, I felt small, helpless. I had no idea what direction to go, but I couldn't just float there, so I swam, blind, desperate, toward where I thought the voices had come from. Then, out of nowhere, my hand slammed into something. I pushed my face above the water, breathing hard. I reached out and clung to whatever I'd hit. My hand searched and found skin, a neck. A face. A person. I grabbed the body and turned it, praying it wasn't Charles. The first thing I saw was the foam, thick and white, bubbling from his mouth, slipping down his chin like the ocean was trying to crawl out of him. His skin was pale, lips turning blue, his face swollen and stiff. I turned him gently, afraid of what I'd see, praying it wasn't Charles. His eyes were open, staring straight at me, unmoving. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. His face looked wrong, twisted by fear, the water, the cold. Then I saw it. The curve of his jaw, the scar under his right eye. Mike. My arms locked up. I couldn't breathe. He wasn't moving, not blinking, not flinching, not even drifting, just foam pulsing from his mouth in little spurts, like the sea still lived inside him, trying to force its way out. He looked like he was still watching me, but there was nothing behind his eyes. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to shake him, to scream, to do something, but all I did was stare. Then a wave slammed into us, and he was gone. I spun around, looking, screaming his name, but there was nothing left. Just me and water and darkness. I was alone, again. I didn't know where the beach was anymore. Didn't know if I was swimming farther out. I couldn't hear anything. Couldn't think. I just floated there, silent, accepting. Then, a sound. A horn. I snapped my eyes open. A light was moving along the shoreline. The ATV, our beach vehicle. I don't even remember thinking. I just swam. My muscles were dead, but something kicked in. Survival instinct, maybe. I swam until my body hit the sand. On the beach, I saw a child lying motionless. Two of my colleagues were crouched over him, one doing chest compressions. I stumbled forward. My knees gave out, and I dropped to the ground. One of them ran to me. "Edward, where's Charles? He was with you. Did you see Mike? Mike's missing?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at the sand. My whole body was shaking. Another teammate grabbed me by the collar and shouted in my face. "Edward, what happened? Where are they?" I slowly looked up at him. "Mike is dead." Everyone froze. Two of them ran over. "What do you mean? Did you see him?" I nodded. "Charles was with me. A wave split us up. I called for him, but he never answered." I collapsed onto the sand again. One of them shouted, "We have to go back. We can leave Charles out there." But no one else moved. No one even said no. They just stared out at the sea, blank-faced, like they knew we'd barely made it back ourselves. I laid there, letting the cold sand press into my skin. I'd lost two friends, and I hadn't saved a single life tonight. There was nothing left to do but wait. Wait for dawn, or for their bodies to wash ashore. The sea didn't take all of us, just enough to remind us it could. First off, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who knows of such a building. To be honest, I guess there's a house like that everywhere. In every city, every town, hell, maybe even in every neighborhood. You might know it as well. It's an old house, abandoned for years, probably. You've never seen anyone going in there on their own, neither seen anyone coming out of it. If there ever were people who tried to buy it and move in, they changed their minds about that pretty quickly. The lawn is overgrown. Maybe there's even garbage there. If there's a tree, it's either sick and dying or dead already. From time to time, you can even smell this strange odor wafting through the neighborhood. Well, the one I'm talking about is at the end of the road where I live. It's dilapidated and abandoned, and it kinda looks haunted, to be honest. I've lived here for decades, yet no one ever bought that place. No one ever visited, and the only time I can remember anyone even working close to it was when the city deemed its overgrown hedges a potential hazard. They sent someone to trim the outsides of the bushes and cut the branches of the trees growing out over the road. It didn't change much, I guess, since it was still an eyesore, but it definitely was less ugly, at least for a while. When I was a kid, my friends and I would often dare each other to hop over the old rusted fence and walk around the lawn. It was a dumb game, and I can only remember a single time when one of us even did it. Johnny. A blonde-haired boy who was 2 years younger than the rest of us and wanted to be part of our group so badly actually jumped over the fence and ran to the front door. He stumbled, fell, scraped his knee, and came running back crying. We laughed, then got concerned when we saw his leg. It looked like he had a rash, and bubbles were forming on his skin, along the small cut. Johnny wasn't allowed to play with us anymore from then on, and I guess the others lost interest in the house as well. The next time I saw that kid was months later, out shopping with his mom, and I still remembered how strange it felt that he looked different, kinda off sickly. I never saw him again, but back then people tended to come and go from time to time, so it didn't bother me much. We grew up, all of us, and started to stop caring about exploring the neighborhood. But I still remember looking at that damned house that seemed somehow frozen in time. There were storms and flooding. We had neighbors that almost got their roof blown off, yet that one building at the end of the road never even lost as much as a shingle, as far as I can tell. It was eerie, yet no one else seemed to really care about it. The most I got was a polite smile and a sting that's crazy. I finished school, went to college, then moved back a few years later. You know how life can be? Well, my parents remodeled our house while I was gone, yet this one damned place looked exactly the same when I returned. I can't even tell you how I felt when I saw it again. Somewhere deep down, I had hoped it would have either been bought and rebuilt as well, or that someone had finally torn it down, but that wasn't the case. As I stepped out of my car in my parents' driveway, I immediately spotted it. The rotten shingles, the overgrown lawn, and even the rusted fence looked just like how I remembered. No one had touched it while I was gone, and the trees had regrown their branches, now reaching into the street again. I asked my dad about it, but he only shook his head. "That's just how it is," he said, with a distant look in his eyes. Well, my parents died 4 years ago, which meant that I inherited the house I grew up in. It wasn't unexpected, which doesn't mean I wasn't distraught though. Cancer is a bitch, and it got both of them. Dad went first. He simply didn't wake up after the last operation, and it broke my mom's will to live. She just fell apart and stopped eating. And not even a month later, I found her dead in her bed in the morning. I hope wherever they are happy now and not in pain. But that's not the reason I touched in writing this today. So while they did leave me the house, they also left me with a ton of headaches. I never realized how much work went into keeping up a whole building. And I don't mean just the taxes, etc. Sometimes it feels like I spend the weekends cleaning just for it to be dirty again by next Friday. Every morning, I dread looking in my mailbox, fearing another unpaid bill I had no clue about. And then there's the ant problem. This one I noticed even before my parents had died. It started at the kitchen window, and I don't know how those little monsters got in, but they formed a fucking highway of ants, right to the fridge. I tried everything, from poison to cleaning to putting out paper, so I could reroute those bastards, but nothing seemed to work. Anything I tried gave me a few hours of peace at most. I've even put tape all over the window frame and have closed it permanently, but they still managed to get in somehow. Those things are big, by the way. Massive, if I think back to how the ants in my childhood looked. Some of them might be from completely different species, while others seem strangely deformed. They almost drove me insane, to be honest. I started hating going into the kitchen at all for fear of seeing them again. But I think I know now where they are coming from, and I shudder to imagine what will happen if I don't do something soon. You see, an hour ago, while drinking a couple of beers, and after I called up one of the few people I've known since childhood still living in this neighborhood, my curiosity got to me. The house at the end of the road came up in the conversation. Of course, my friend hardly acknowledged it, but I got it into my head that I could at least get a reprieve from my own problems if I took a closer look at that eyesore, now as an adult. Armed with my phone, a flashlight, and some liquid courage, I made my way down the road, walking briskly through the night, already feeling the same way I had as a child again. Only this time I wasn't out after curfew. There was no one who would tell me to stay away, and I could feel in my bones that I would finally find out what was wrong with that place. Well, it didn't take me long to reach the outer perimeter and the rusted fence. Only I didn't hop over it, instead chose to use the gate right in the middle of the lot. If I had thought the fence was a problem, that piece of junk was even worse. It sounded like someone screaming as I opened it up, giving me the first chills of the night. There was a completely overgrown stone path in the middle of the lot, and I kept to it since everything in my mind told me to keep off the lawn. It was moving with the breeze, but not in the same direction. Of course, I took out the flashlight and slowly let the circle of light illuminate my surroundings, from the dead yet still growing trees to the shrubs and weeds. It looked off, all of it, like somehow the shadows were moving even if I kept the torch pointed at a spot. That was the second time I felt chills that night, but I reasoned that I was just imagining it all. The porch and front door were only a couple of steps away, so I forced myself to stop dawdling around and kept going. I remember the sound the wind made when it breezed through the vegetation. The noise of stalks and stems rubbing against each other almost sounded like thousands of small legs crawling over the ground. That memory makes me uneasy. But back then, bolstered by the alcohol, I just shook it off and walked up the 2 steps to the porch. The old dark wood on the side looked like it would break the moment I put my foot on it, and I think I could see termites disappearing every time the light of my torch passed over them. Not normal ones either. Those things seemed strangely elongated. Abnormal. I took a deep breath, shook off those feelings of fear and trepidation, and turned toward the door. Something was in there. I knew. Somehow I could feel it. It had been bugging me for years, and now I finally found myself in front of the door. A breeze blew past me and carried with it an earthy smell, and the sound of stalks scraping over each other. Only this time, it really did remind me of insects. Millions of them. Somewhere deep inside, I think I hoped the door would be locked, but as I touched the handle, it swung inward without a problem. The soft sound of tiny insects hitting the floor reached my ears, but I was too transfixed by what I was seeing to notice it at that moment. There was furniture in there, but every piece the light of my torch touched was crawling with insects. A black mass of bodies trying to escape back into the darkness. They were everywhere, on every surface, skittering about, and as I looked closer, I could see that most of the furniture had been reduced to a mere facade. All the wood and everything that wasn't plastic had been long since devoured. I could feel a shiver again and wanted to step back, but at that exact moment, something fell from the frame of the door above and dropped down the back of my shirt. With a howl, I shot forward, not thinking about what I was doing. My foot touched the floorboards inside the house, and as if they were made of paper, they broke through at first contact. I screamed in shock and horror as I felt myself falling. The torch tumbled from my grasp and fell down into the basement, while my hands luckily found a strut that just about held my weight. It was aching the moment I swung down. I could see the light disappear in the darkness, then heard the torch landing with a soft crunch. Beneath me, just a few steps below, I could see it. A dark, moving wave of insects, rushing toward the torch I had dropped, ripping at each other to be the first to claim the new prey. It couldn't have been more than a second that I looked down, but I'm sure I could see hundreds of different species in this mass of whirling bodies. Centipedes, ants, termites, and spiders, all ripping at each other and swarming over the flashlight. A hiss reached me from down there as the light got dim, then died, but I couldn't concentrate on that. Things above were hardly better. Tiny chitinous legs touched my fingers still clinging to the strut. I felt a sharp pain as something bit me, and then more small bodies crawling and racing over my hands. They were biting me, eating me, I realized. In their frenzy, those things wanted to devour me. With another howl, I tried to pull myself up, now almost in complete darkness, and felt more insects dropping from the edge of the hole and down onto my head and shoulders. They were biting into every single uncovered piece of flesh they could find. My ears, neck, and cheeks. Pain was radiating out from every bite throughout my whole body. Those moments are so hazy now. I remember the agony and myself screaming for my life. One of my hands found the frame of the door. I pulled myself up and felt a centipede crawling down my face, then suddenly biting the corner of my lip. I couldn't even wipe it away. All I could think about at that moment was how to get out of there, how to flee and never return. Crying, I pulled myself up, rolled out of the entrance to the house, and heard the sounds of hundreds of bodies bursting beneath me as I fell down the steps to the porch. My hand, already covered in bug bites, touched the grass, and I immediately felt more insects turning, twisting, and clinging to me. Somehow I managed to get up on my feet and ran while ripping my clothes off, whipping myself with my shirt to get rid of those things that were already buried into the skin on my back. Maybe some of my neighbors saw me, running up the road half naked and screaming, but right now I don't care. The ambulance is on its way since I can't drive right now. My fingers are swollen and moving them is painful. but I need to write this down. There's a rash everywhere on my body, hundreds of bites. I've pulled stingers, mandibles, and tiny insect heads out of my skin, from my back to my forehead. It's hard to keep a coherent thought right now. Those things are vicious. They are waiting for new victims. If I had dropped down into the basement, I wouldn't have made it out alive again. That much is clear. That place isn't set to house. It is a pit. And sooner or later, they might spread. The moment I'm out of the hospital, I will go back there, but not to visit it. No, I will burn it down to the ground. Everything. And when I watch the whole place go up in flames, I might finally feel a tiny bit better. My job is, or at least was, working for a low-budget storage company. You find a lot of strange things that people leave behind in this sort of job. Mostly junk, sometimes valuables. Occasionally my company, Tidy Storage, would do an auction for things people left behind, but mostly they wouldn't bother. Instead, it would be my job to go in and clear out the abandoned units and get them ready for the next customer. It was a decent living, at least until last week, when I found that damn radio. I had just arrived at work to start my shift. I walked up to the front gate and entered the code out of habit. When nothing happened, I groaned, remembering the electronic gate was broken and I wasn't sure when or if it would be fixed. I fumbled for the old key I had been given and unlocked the adjacent gate and stepped into the storage facility. The large padlock slipped off and clattered to the ground as the gate swung open with hinges, as rusty as the rest of the dilapidated facility. I laughed briefly when I considered the company's name, Tidy Storage indeed. I guessed that since our prices were dirt cheap, it was the only thing that saved whatever meager business this place eked out. I wasn't even sure if there were other employees here, or if it was just me and the lot manager Tim, who never seemed to be around. I slipped the key back into my pocket and moved along. I found the building desolate as always. My footsteps were hollow in the quiet. It was a world of peeling paint, faded numbers and bolts, so old they flaked red onto the ground. As I walked along toward the unit I was looking for, my boots managed to find every crevice and fracture. The concrete was old and weary. Like many things in the rundown place, I wondered if it would ever be fixed. I kept a steady pace. My shift had just started, and I was in no rush. I did find myself wishing it hadn't been so quiet. The sound of isolation, the echo of nothing except my own footsteps, was disquieting. I was annoyed at myself for forgetting to charge my headphones, as I realized that the lonely ambiance would likely be my only companion that day, unless I happened upon an actual person. The small circuit I walked revealed more of the storage units. Rust bloomed like a disease, spreading from corners and hinges. The numbers, once bold and bright, now faded. Looking at the degradation, I was glad that I had a recent tetanus shot. I still couldn't believe people would be desperate enough to even use this place to store whatever junk they couldn't live without. I guess I couldn't say much. I had to work in this mess after all. When I had started working here, I thought the solitude might be nice. Yet now I found myself bored and slightly lonesome. Nothing stirring except the cold wind outside and the thoughts in my head. I walked deeper into the facility, looking at a nearby unit. I was close. It was into the 100S, so I was almost to my destination. The rows of storage units stretched out in long corridors. Size was the one thing that this place didn't skimp on, though it was tedious walking the grounds sometimes. The units stood shoulder to shoulder, monotonously watching me as I walked between them. Then I came upon Unit 113. It had a note left by Tim, the lot manager, and indicated that this one was past the last notice for the owner to pay or clear out before we took possession. I managed to force upon the door, which was slightly stuck ever after unlocking it. Even in the gloom of the flickering overhead bulb, I could see how thoroughly someone had made a mess of the place. Debris littered the floor, papers lay torn or trampled, or water warped into crisp waves. A pattern was drawn on the wall, likely some kind of graffiti. I rubbed a finger over it and relaxed when I realized it was chalk and not paint, easier to clean up. The more I looked around, the clearer it became that I'd stumbled upon someone's obsession. Old books were stacked along the walls of the unit and falling out of crumbling boxes. The spines of the books bore weird titles and strange symbols that looked like something out of the occult. Their dusty fragrance coated the air, blending with the metallic tang of metal and wires strewn about like the aftermath of an explosion. Bits of brass and rusted tools caught the overhead sickly light. It seemed as if whoever was using the unit had been building or repairing something. At least they were before it was just left abandoned. I found the clash between the weird books, odd chalk symbols, and the metal scrap rather jarring. I might have been overthinking it, but it was stranger than usual. Most units filled up slowly, at a pace their owners never admitted was trash. But not this one. Not when scattered across the room were papers with hastily scribbled notes and diagrams, tapestries of ideas pinned haphazardly to the walls. With a floor littered with open books, their pages marked with frantic underlines and exclamation points. Whoever had used this space had been driven by an almost manic sense of purpose, evident in the chaotic yet intentional arrangement of every item. I took a closer look at the weird outline. The lines of chalk had tracked like footprints across the walls and floor. Diagrams wove among the chaos, haunting like disembodied veins. Lines dissected the walls, racing and looping before coming to blunt ends. Strings of symbols strayed into forgotten corners. There was a symmetry to them, a rhythm that made me wonder if they'd been left behind to be found. Near the far wall, I stumbled onto an arrangement that looked less haphazard than the rest. Some of the books had been opened and left like cracked doors, a circled pattern showing through from one page to the next. I paused over it, my own breath loud in the stale air. A high-pitched tone pricked at me from somewhere above, then vanished just as quickly. I stood perfectly still, waiting for it to come again, almost wishing it would. But there was nothing except the rattle of the faulty light and the drum of my own heart. The whole room vibrated with an unsettling silence, the kind that made it impossible to think clearly. I couldn't explain why, but something about how everything was left here felt wrong. When I navigated through the towers of boxes, my eyes fixed on what lay in the center of the storage unit, an antique radio. It looked like someone had brought the thing straight from the 1940s. The thing was perched atop an old end table, laying there like it was afraid I wouldn't see it. Even from across the room, I could tell how strangely new it looked. Shiny mahogany and glass, free from the layers of grime and rot that smothered everything else. I couldn't believe someone would leave that thing behind. Whoever had used Unit 113 must have been a little eccentric. The strange drawings, books, and radio made it seem like maybe they were a conspiracy theorist or something. Whoever they were, they had lost it all now. It seemed strange they would go through all the effort to put all this here and then just abandon it. And now it was my job to clean up the mess. I felt certain there was an interesting story behind the markings and books, but mostly the pristine radio. There was something about its placement, the care with which it had been left, that piqued my interest. I told myself I should get the dolly and start carting the boxes of books out first, yet I was too intrigued by the radio. I had to find out if it still worked, and if it did, see what it might be worth. I reached out to touch the dial and turn it on, and the radio vibrated with a weird anticipation. The odd feedback was strange. I brushed it off, and when I finally twisted the knobs, the speakers gave a pop and filled the air with static, louder than I expected, and more urgent than I was ready for. I was about to turn off the device again, overwhelmed by the incessant white noise, but it finally picked up a signal. And the signal had a voice. It was no voice I had ever heard. It cracked in bursts, atonal and discordant, like the air was filled with bees. But as I drew it in, it got sharper, less of a fuzz, and more of a buzz. Less of a buzz and more of a plea. I pressed my ear close, so close I felt the hairs stand at attention. I had thought the static was deafening, but I was wrong. The clarity was worse. Please, help. It was subtle enough that I almost packed it up and pretended it was nothing but an echo in my own lonely brain. But the voice refused to die away. I thought it might be some sort of trick, maybe some secret recording device playing something back. The voice had a far-off quality to it, like it came from another time or place or dimension, warped and bent and heartbreaking. I wasn't sure why, but the more I listened, the more real it had sounded. I couldn't explain, except to say I knew the way a trapped animal knows a trap. It looped in on itself, an infinite reel of terror. Please help me. I considered going to find Tim, but he wasn't there when I had arrived, and I wasn't sure if he would be at all that day. I thought about taking the strange radio to the police and seeing if they knew what to do. but something about the appeal of the voice compelled me to listen, like it was meant for me specifically, and I alone could help. After all, there was no one else who could hear, no one else I could tell who would take it seriously. No one else but the radio and me, buzzing along in awful harmony. What was I supposed to do to help? And just who was I trying to help? I sat with my head in my hands and listened until I was too disturbed to listen anymore. I switched the radio off, and the daze I was in broke. I stepped out of the storage unit to catch my breath. After a few moments, I composed myself and went back inside. I had to try and find out what was going on. I switched the radio back on. Static once again filled the room, bouncing off the cement walls and flooding every corner. I listened, waiting for something, knowing it would come, fearing what it might be. The voice broke through like a distant scream, louder this time, torn apart and stitched back together by the crackling ether. It wavered, rising and falling. My spine stiffened. "Help hurts. So hungry, please." The desperate voice pleaded into the void, and I listened, helpless to help, but painfully aware of whoever was in trouble and whatever might be happening to them. I stumbled backward, eyes fixed on the device. The situation felt surreal, impossible. And yet it was there, real as the dust motes swirling in the dim light. My fingers dug into the edge of the flimsy table the radio rested on, holding on to the world that was spinning out from under me. I had to do something. I had to try to communicate with them. But how? I had an idea just then. I grabbed the radio, searching its face with trembling hands, tracing the outline of its dials and switches. I turned it over, frantic and desperate, until I saw the frayed wires and the small section that was responsible for communication. To my dismay, the transmitter was damaged. The cries for help continued, and I tried to think what I could do. There was something I thought that might work. I returned to the storage lot's main office. To my luck, I found what I was searching for, an old ham radio. It was an old thing, battered and stained with grease, a relic of another time, its knobs worn smooth, its faceplate scratched with the history of years gone by. Though the radio itself wouldn't turn on, the transmitter looked intact, so I set about my work. I needed to understand. I needed to help. I needed to know who was calling and where they were. My hands moved with a purpose I barely recognized, setting up a workspace in the crowded storage unit. I had found a small toolbox, mostly used for repairs on the lot. I pried it open, rummaging through mismatched sockets and forgotten screwdrivers, pulling out the few items I needed to begin. Some other components like wire cutters were scavenged from Unit 113 itself, though most of the discarded bits in there were useless for my work. The work took a while. I was well versed in restoring electronics, but not with things that were quite this old. Though an odd kind of peace descended, eerie and consuming, as I lost myself in the repair. The world outside faded, shrinking to just the size of the radio and the size of the task at hand. I stripped the old wires and replaced them, careful not to pull too hard, too fast. Time slipped by unnoticed, marked only by the flickering bulb and the soft thud of my heart. The sound from the radio was gone, after turning it off to repair, yet the quiet felt worse, almost unbearably so. The absence of the voice drove me forward with an urgency. I couldn't shake. I had to speak with them. I had to help. I finished the last connection, my hands stiff and sore, my mind a blur of tangled thoughts. The radio sat before me, repaired, at least as far as I could see. The cry for help lingered in my mind, the desperate plea refusing to fade. I hoped that my plan would work. Only one way to know for sure now. I turned it on. The blare of static came through immediately. The connection sounded bad, and I almost shut it off again, thinking that I might have made it worse. Just as I was about to lose hope, the voice crept through, growing inside the noise, becoming human by slow degrees. "Help anyone, please." The voice, the same desperate plea, reaching through layers of interference. It was a specter, thin and distorted, almost lost in the wall of static, but there, unmistakably there. The voice ebbed and flowed, swelling in strength only to break apart and dissolve into the relentless sea of sound. "Help, it hurts me. I'm here, all gone." They left. They sounded desperate, and I had the means to try and help now. I picked up the newly repaired transmitter and attempted to respond. "Hello? Who is there? How can I help?" The static grew quieter somehow. A long pause made me consider if it had worked after all. Before I could try and repeat myself, I heard the voice again. The static finally lessened, revealing a voice that now seemed somehow clearer, more focused. It trembled with what I could only interpret as relief. "You? Me? You actually hear me?" The voice sounded feminine now, though strained and thin, as if speaking required tremendous effort. "Thank you thought, no one ever find me." I leaned closer to the transmitter, my pulse quickening. "Yes, I hear you. Where are you? Who are you?" "I don't know where I am anymore." The voice cracked, dissolving momentarily into static before returning, clearer than it had ever been before. "It's dark. So dark. I've been trapped in this place for so long. I don't even know how long. How did you end up there? Where is it? Were you kidnapped? Let me know so I can send help." I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The radio hissed and popped in response. "No, I found something in the books. A doorway, a way through." Her words came faster now, more desperate. I thought I was so clever. I thought I'd discovered something no one else had, but it was waiting for me. What was waiting? "Who are you?" I pressed the transmitter harder, as if physical pressure could somehow strengthen our tenuous connection. "My name is Rebecca. I rented this unit to study. It was the only place that was safe. The books, the symbols, they're all part of something bigger." The static swelled momentarily, drowning her words before receding again. "There's a hunger here, in this place between places. It feeds on us on essence. Help me. I'm fading." I looked around at the chalk markings with new understanding. They weren't random at all. They formed a pattern, a diagram, a door. "How can I help you? What do I need to do?" The urgency in my voice surprised even me. I could barely believe this was all happening. Yet the impossibility of the situation did little to dull my desire to help. The radio fell silent for so long I thought I'd lost her. Then, softer than before, the ritual. "You need to reverse it. The book with the red binding, on the far wall. Page 43. My eyes scanned the chaos until I spotted it. A leather-bound volume, its spine the color of dried blood. I scrambled over boxes and debris, snatching it up with trembling hands. The book was heavier than I expected, its leather cover worn smooth in places, cracked and peeling in others. I flipped through the yellowed pages, each one covered in cramped handwriting and arcane diagrams that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Page 43 revealed a complex circular pattern, not unlike the chalk markings on the walls, but more intricate. Notes in faded ink crowded the margins, some crossed out, others underlined multiple times. "I found it," I said, returning to the radio. "But I don't understand what I'm looking at. The symbols need to be redrawn backwards." Rebecca's voice was weaker now, fading in and out like a bad signal. "The words, pronounce them in reverse order. Hurry, I can feel it coming closer." "What's coming closer?" The question escaped before I could stop it. A burst of static erupted from the radio, so loud I had to cover my ears. When it subsided, Rebecca's voice had changed, lower, strangled, as if speaking through something thick. "Please help me." The hairs on my arms stood on end, and the air in the storage unit seemed to grow colder, heavier. I looked down at the book again, studying the symbols. They seemed familiar somehow, though I knew I'd never seen them before. My fingers traced the outline of the central figure, a twisted, inhuman shape with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to follow my gaze across the page. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Was this poor girl stuck in there with that thing? My gaze darted to the chalk markings on the wall, seeing them with new clarity. I moved to the wall and hurriedly wiped away the old marking and replaced them with inversions of the previous patterns. I moved as fast as I could, spurred on by the anguished sounds of Rebecca on the radio. Something terrible was coming for her, and I had to get her out of there. The chalk dust clung to my sweaty fingers as I worked, each symbol requiring painstaking care to invert properly. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder at shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The final symbol took shape under my trembling hand, a twisted glyph that resembled an eye with tendrils spiraling outward. "Almost done," I called to the radio. my voice cracking with tension. Just one more line. The words from the book felt strange in my mouth as I pronounced them backward, each syllable slippery and wrong, like something that wasn't meant to be spoken by human tongues. The air in the storage unit grew dense, charged with an electricity that made my skin prickle and the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I completed the final reverse symbol, the radio erupted with a sound that wasn't static. It was something deeper, more primal. A scream that morphed into a roar, followed by Rebecca's voice, suddenly crystal clear and urgent. "It's working," she cried. "I can see light. I can feel myself coming back. Please, don't stop now. I need to get out of here." The chalk markings began to glow with a sickly blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the desperate pleas coming from the radio. The temperature in the room plummeted so quickly that my breath came out in visible clouds. The pages of the book fluttered as if caught in a sudden breeze, though the air itself seemed stagnant, frozen. The glow from the symbols intensified, casting long, distorted shadows across the concrete floor. The door to the storage unit fell down on its tracks and slammed to the ground. Ignoring the distractions, I hoped the ritual was finally finished. Yet Rebecca's haunting cries pierced the silence once more, distorted again. "One last step, hurry the radio. Can't get through, take it somewhere. Anywhere better reception, out of there." Her voice echoed with a chilling urgency, as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating us in a desperate race against time. There had to be one last step, but what? I needed a stronger signal. She was breaking up again, and I needed better reception. Moving the radio outside the building might make a difference. It had to. My eyes fixed on the radio. The thin walls of the storage unit reverberated with echoes of Rebecca's suffering. The cries were frantic now. She sounded like she was in pain. I had to help and get a clear message again, and complete the last step. I seized the old radio and ran to the door. In my haste, I almost tripped, my foot slipping on a nearby book that had fallen. I caught myself before I fell, barely noticing the line of salt I had disturbed. My foot struck it, broke it, scattered traces everywhere. That was the moment everything changed. The pressure that followed was immense, an invisible weight that fell so fast and hard I could scarcely comprehend it. It was like the air itself was turning against me, suffocating me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. My mind raced but came up blank, terror eclipsing thought. In my hands, the radio twisted. It was so sudden, so violent. I had no time to tighten my grip before it wrenched free, yanked by a force that was greater than anything I had ever known. I watched it fall in slow motion, as though the world had slowed down just to let me see the finality of it. Plastic and metal and wires, bright flashes of white and silver, shattered against the cracked floor. The noise was explosive, louder than thunder, an orchestra of destruction. The air quivered. The walls trembled. Then I felt it, a presence, vast and oppressive. Something had been released, but it was not Rebecca. In that moment, it spoke to me. Not words, but a terrible buzzing feeling. It reminded me of the sound of thousands of insects, chittering all at once. A cold wind swept through the storage unit, rustling papers and making the pages of open books flutter wildly. Then I reeled at the thunderous proclamation of the real being that had escaped. "I am hunger," it roared. "I am the void between stars, the divine made manifest." I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of moldering cardboard boxes. The books inside spilled across the concrete floor, their pages opening to reveal more of those terrible symbols. "Clever little girl found me," the voice continued. Almost purring now. So much knowledge in that pretty head. She thought she could commune with the divine, bind me to her will. A sound like grinding glass that might have been laughter. She was delicious, yet her voice, the abyssal tones morphed into an eerie mimicry of Rebecca's own, lingering on each word. "Still tastes the sweetest." My back hit the storage unit door. I fumbled for the handle while looking behind me, my eyes desperately searching for the source of the terrible voice. She tried to keep me here. The bindings she placed were still effective in trapping me, starving me. The voice from the radio declared, "But you have delivered me from this prison." My limbs were heavy, and my thoughts sluggish. Frost formed on the metal walls as the temperature plummeted. I tried to speak, but terror froze my tongue. I recalled the instructions to reverse the chalk markings, the odd vocalizations, taking the radio out, breaking the salt line. My stomach churned with the realization of my mistake. The ritual was never meant to free Rebecca. It had freed the thing that had killed her. The haunting voice rang out once more. I thank you for freeing me, little thing. The reward for your service and my deliverance is your life. For now at least, I am sure I will see you again. Soon. The words coiled around me, leaving me frozen, haunted, and hollow. The presence in the room was gone in the next instant. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The world stood still, and all I could hear was that whisper, echoing over and over until it was the only thing left in my mind. The silence closed in on my mind as well, and I was alone. I stood in the doorway, burdened by the awful knowledge of what I had set loose upon the world. The shattered radio lay in pieces, a stark testament to my failure. I replayed every moment in my mind, each memory sharp and unforgiving. The enormity of what I had done settled over me like a suffocating fog. Since that day, nothing else has happened. I abandoned my position at tidy storage without explanation, silently slipping into obscurity. There's a monstrous presence lurking somewhere now. Whatever it is, it knows me, and I'm acutely aware that my fleeting respite will soon crumble. I'm left to this solitary vigil, tormented by fear of what has been set loose. My partner Max and I have been running a gardening business together for the past few years. Every day we go out to a different house and pretty up the gardens to the client's liking. Some days are better than others. It typically depends on the client we're working for, and whatever it is that they want us to do that day. The property we're working at today just happens to be Max's favorite place to work at, not because she especially likes the client, or that the work is particularly easy, rather that there's always something interesting to be found in the garden. The house itself is rather ordinary, a boring yellow, with nothing conspicuous about the structure, but the garden is beautiful, and the location couldn't be better. I'm underneath a sago palm, clipping the leaves that have turned yellow, when Max comes running up to me. Look, she says, I found something. I crawl out from under the palm and stand up to see her hands cupped together. What is it? She opens her hands to reveal a tiny snake. It's a little guy, she says, handing it to me. The snake wriggles around in my hands. It has no idea what's going on. Strange-looking worm. It's a little ringneck, she tells me. What do you want to do with it, I ask, already knowing the answer. We're going to take him home, and I'm going to build a little house for him. That's what I thought. I pour out my water bottle, fill it with some soil from the garden, take out my pocket knife, and poke a few holes in the lid. This isn't the first time I've done this. I put the little ringneck inside and hand the bottle back to Max. Worm secured for transport, I report. Thank you, she smiles. Do you have another water bottle? Because that was my last one. Whenever we find a critter while we're out gardening, Max always wants to take it home and keep it as a pet. This house just happens to be located right off the riverbank, making the garden here the perfect environment for critters to inhabit. Every time we work here, Max finds another snake, toad, or lizard to bring home. After we get home that evening, I pull an old glass tank out of the closet. This will make for a decent terrarium for the little snake. We've been collecting fish tanks, containers, and all sorts of things to build terrariums for all the creatures Max brings home. Max fills the tank with soil, sticks, and a random assortment of other knickknacks for decoration. The snake needs to have a nice home after all. Once she's done setting it up, she sets it next to the other tank on the dresser. She takes the little ringneck out of the bottle and sets it in its new home. Plunky, this is Lucy the handful. Max says, introducing Plunky, which I guess is what she named the ringneck, to its new neighbor, the blue-eyed leucistic ball python in the terrarium next door. Lucy is a menace, and would probably eat you given the opportunity, but you're neighbors now, so make friends. Lucy snakes her way up the glass wall to investigate the new creature living beside her. Plunky slithers around and hides behind a rock. I don't think Plunky wants to make friends, I say. Oh, hush, Max replies. He's just shy. If you say so. I look at the snakes on the dresser, then look around our cramped abode. Every dresser, desk, table, and counter has a cage, a fish tank, or some kind of terrarium on it. Everywhere you look, there are fish, snakes, newts, lizards, frogs, or toads. Our house is essentially a zoo. Max, I think we start running out of room for critters. There's always more room for critters, she replies dismissively. A few weeks later, we're back working at the house on the riverbank again. I'm pulling weeds when Max comes running towards me with her hands cupped together. "Look what I found," she says, opening her hands to show me. I look at it, bewildered. What is it? It's a little guy. It's some kind of amphibian, or maybe a reptile. It's hard to tell. It's a slimy little moss-colored creature with a head like a toad and a body like a lizard. I've never seen anything quite like it. Yeah, it's a little guy, but what the heck is it? His name is Pee-wee, and he's a critter. You want to take Pee-wee home with us? Of course. It's too dangerous for a little critter out there in the world all by his lonesome. He could get gobbled up by a bigger critter. But what do Pee-wees even eat? I ask. Smaller critters. Probably worms or bugs. Where would we even put it? It's not like we have the extra space for him. He's so little though. He doesn't need a lot of space. We can make room for him. I'm not going to be able to argue my way out of this. Fine. I say we can keep him. But this is the last one. We really don't have room for any more animals. Several months later, spring has arrived. It's the busy season for us. Most days we're double booked with clients, meaning Max and I are often working at different properties. I'd already finished my job for the day and arrived home before Max. The moment I walk through the door, I bash my foot on a cage sitting in the middle of the room and nearly trip over the thing. That's the third time this week. Goopy starts hissing at me from the cage I just kicked. What are you complaining about? I said I'm the one who's hurt here. She hisses back at me. Well, maybe move your house if you don't want me to kick it. She glares at me with disgust. Fine. Keep your house there if you want. What do I care? My step's still got 9 other toes. I couldn't tell you exactly what Goopy is. She's some kind of reptile. A very angry reptile. Max has been busy adding to her creature collection these past few months. I try my best to remember to feed everyone, and to remember what everyone eats, but I couldn't even tell you how many animals are in this house, let alone what half of them even are. Anything Max finds that has a pulse she takes home. Plunky, the ringneck, currently enjoys the company of 20-some other ringnecks who share his terrarium. They all have names, not that I can remember them all or tell them apart. I open a dresser drawer, pulling from it a plastic container full of crickets that live next to my socks, because there isn't anywhere else to keep them. I make my rounds distributing the crickets among the little snakes, toads, and the smaller amphibian and reptile-looking creatures who eat them. Then I give the remaining crickets some seeds and fruit so that they can eat and breed and make more crickets to feed to the other animals. I hand out the worms, the mice, and the rats to whatever eats those. I lift the top of the cage that Lucy the handful lives in and dangle a rat in front of her. She strikes, misses the rat completely, and bites my hand, making me drop the rat. It's not the first time that Lucy has bitten me. The rat skitters around the cage in a panic. I put the lid back on. Lucy will catch it eventually. Not like it has anywhere to go. When I'm done feeding the other animals, I feed the mice and rats so that they can grow up and breed and make more mice and rats for the other animals to eat. Circle of life. Everyone is food for someone. Once I'm finally done feeding everyone, I lay down. This bed is the sole place where I can be comfortable in this house, probably because it's the only part of this house that doesn't have a strange creature in or on it, not counting myself. I'm not even laying down a minute when Max walks in the door, carrying a small kennel. I don't even want to know what's in it. Babe, look what I found, Max says, setting the kennel down on the bed next to me. I roll over to see a slimy moss-colored monstrosity staring back at me. It looks a lot like Pee-wee, only smaller. It doesn't look happy. You found another Pee-wee. His name's Little P. I think it's Pee-wee's brother. He was hiding in the same garden where we found Pee-wee. Great. Now he can have a friend, I say with as much enthusiasm as a rock. We still have to get a bigger cage, one that can fit both of them. Or, and hear me out on this, we can put them both in the same little cage and hope that they have the same temperament as betta fish and kill each other. Of course, that's assuming they are both males. With my luck, they are probably the opposite sex and will just breed and make more Pee-wees. Geez, I stepped home 1 minute, and you stepped here already sassing me. Sorry. It's just that we already have too many animals. It's already a struggle taking care of them all. We should really consider letting some of them go. No way. A sit'll die out there. Fine, we can keep him, but no more. We really can't take care of any more. This is the last one, I promise, Max says. We've had this conversation before. She'll bring home another animal and promise that it's the last one, then come home with another animal a week later. She can't help herself. Has everyone been fed? Max asks. Yes, everyone has been fed. Everyone, she repeats. Yes, Lucy, Bongo, Booger, Goober, Goopy, Blanche, Rose, Dorothy, Sophia, all the rats, frogs, toads, crickets, fish, frogs, lizards, plunkies, and everyone else has been fed. Did you feed Pee-wee? No. Pee-wee is too fat. He needs to lose some weight. You have to feed Pee-wee. He's a growing boy. When we first found Pee-wee, he was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. Back then, he was happy eating crickets and worms. However, he has grown considerably these past few months. He's not quite the size or a horse, more like a large dog. His appetite has grown considerably as well. Pee-wee can easily devour a family of rats, swallowing them whole and still want more. He sure is growing. I say growing too big for that kennel he's in. If he gets any bigger, he'll still burst right out of it. We'll just have to get a bigger kennel. Max says. Yeah, if we throw the bed out, we might actually have somewhere to put it. Again with the sass. Why are you in such a bad mood tonight? I'm just exhausted. I sigh, staring directly into the eyes of the creature sitting in the cage on the bed in front of me. The next day when I arrive home from work, Max's truck is already sitting in the driveway. She must have finished her job before me. I open the door and walk in. The fish tank Goopy was in is shattered in 100 pieces across the floor. Goopy isn't there. Max, I shout, are you home? I step carefully over the broken glass, out of the sunroom into the living room. The living room is a disaster. Every cage is knocked over. The terrariums are in shambles. Broken glass, sand, pebbles, and all the decorations are scattered across the dressers and floors. The water from the fish tanks has spilled off the dressers and pooled on the floor. Max, I shout again. Where are you? What in the world happened here? I survey the disaster zone. None of the animals appear to be among the clutter. Lucy, Goopy, where did you all go? I take out my phone and call Max. Her phone rings from across the room. It's laying on the bed. I walk over to it, pick it up, and hang up. She's here somewhere, or she was. Her truck was still here when I got home, so she couldn't have gone anywhere. I continue wandering the house, searching each room for Max, for any of the animals, for anything that might provide some kind of hint as to what had happened here. The further back I get in the house, the worse it looks. Every inch of the floor is covered in water and broken glass. There's traces of blood here and there. Someone must have been hurt, but there's no telling who the blood came from. There's still no sign on Max. I can hear a thumping sound coming from the back of the house where the bathroom is. I couldn't hear it from the living room. As I make my way towards the bathroom, the sound grows louder. There's another sound, muffled behind the erratic thumping, a high-pitched screeching coming from the same direction. Cautiously, I approach the bathroom. There's a chair fixed under the doorknob, preventing it from being opened from the inside. Did Max put that there, or did someone else? The door rattles violently, as if who or whatever is inside is trying to get out. That must be the thumping I was hearing. The screeching also seems to be coming from behind the door. Max, are you in there? I shout, knocking on the door. There's no response, only more violent rattling and screeching. I'm coming in, I say, removing the chair from beneath the doorknob. I reach for the handle, turn the knob and slowly pull the door open, cautiously peeking through the crack between the door and its frame until I can fully see what is in there. It's Pee-wee. He's running around the bathroom in frantic circles, crashing into the walls, screeching like a banshee. Without the door muffling the sound, that screech is almost deafening. Never before have I heard him make such a noise. Maybe he's hurt. He looks like he's bleeding. There's shards of glass sticking in his back, but more concerning than that, he looks much bigger today than he did yesterday. He must have burst right out of his cage. I watch him through the crack of the door for a minute. He just continues screeching and running around in a frenzy. He must be too panicked to notice me. Pee-wee, I shout, trying to get his attention. He stops screeching and turns towards me. His eyes fixate on me. I've seen that look in his eyes before. That's exactly how he looks at his food. He unhinges his jaw like a snake, opening his mouth. Blood and saliva pool out. He runs right at me. I slam the door between us. As he crashes into the other side, Pee-wee slams into the door again, knocking it open. I catch the door and struggle to push it back against the brute force of the creature on the other side. Pee-wee pokes his head through the gap between the door and its frame. He turns his head to look at me and lets out a hiss. I push with all the force I can muster, slamming the door on his head. Pee-wee shrieks in pain and retreats back into the bathroom. As soon as he's in, I pick up the chair and prop it under the doorknob to barricade him in. I kick aside the broken glass as my feet and slump down on the wet floor next to the door to catch my breath. The moment I sit, the bathroom door rattles again, and the screeching commences. That poor excuse for a barricade won't hold him long. He'll rattle it loose or break the door down eventually. Max must have shut him in there somehow, but I still don't know what happened to her, where she is, or if she's even alright. I look around this catastrophe of a house. Did Pee-wee really do all of this? The screeching grows louder, but now it sounds like it's coming from either side of me, as though something else were screeching from the opposite end of the house. Oh shit, I'd completely forgotten about the other one. The one Max had brought home yesterday. Is it still here somewhere? No, it can't be. I've searched this entire house. I would have seen it by now if it were still here. It sounds like it's coming from the front of the house. I walk in the direction of the second screeching, warily making my way through each room until I reach the sunroom at the front of the house. It's not in the house. It sounds like it's coming from just outside the front door. Max bursts through the front door carrying the screeching creature. Max, you stir okay? I say, relieved to see her, but the feeling of relief quickly fades as my eyes fix upon the creature she's holding. What are you doing with that? Little P got out. Max cries. Pee-wee must have gotten out while we were gone. By the time I got home, he had broken into the other cages, and he was eating. Max covers her mouth and cries harder. It must be too horrible to say. Max tries to collect herself and continues. When I found Pee-wee, he was about to eat Lucy, but she bit him and chased him off. Lucy? She chased him? Yeah, Pee-wee ran in the bathroom to get away from her, so I shut him in. But I must have left the front door open when I got home. Because when I turned around, Lucy was chasing little P out the door. But where's Lucy now? I ask. I don't know. What about everyone else? I think Pee-wee. She didn't have to say it. That's what I feared. He must have eaten them all. I'm sorry, but I have to ask. Why in the world did you bring that thing back here? I ask, pointing at the creature in her arms. I didn't know what else to do. I could hear him crying all the way down the street. He just sounded so sad and scared. That this is dangerous. I shout, just look what it did to our house and to all our pets. Little P didn't do anything. It was Pee-wee. I saw it. How do you know? We were gone all day. How do you know it wasn't Set's both of them? And even if it was all Pee-wee this time? How do you know that little P would Set do the exact same thing? The ground begins to shake. A loud, low-pitched bellow echoes from the distance. Any other emotions we may have been feeling a moment ago were suddenly replaced with dread and confusion. What the heck was that? I ask. Max just looks at me, dumbfounded. The ground shakes again. The bellowing sound commences. It sounds louder this time. Whatever is making that sound is getting closer. Little P wriggles frantically, freeing himself from Max's arms and falling to the floor. The frantic creature skitters out the open door. Max runs out after it. The shaking becomes more violent. The bellowing sounds like it's right outside. I'm about to follow Max when something slams and crashes from the back of the house. I turn around to look. Pee-wee is running towards me. Before I can even move, he zooms right past me and out the door. I'd prefer to just let him and little P run away, and I really don't want to find whatever is making that awful bellowing noise. But Max is out there, so I have to go. I run outside and am hit with a stench so profound that I retch over in disgust, nearly throwing up. It smells like 1,000 wet dogs rolling around in warm shit on a hot day. I look up at the source of the stench, the bellowing and the shaking ground. A towering monstrosity. larger than a house, is walking up the street in my direction. It looks like Pee-wee, or rather how Pee-wee might look to an ant. The ground shakes with every step it takes. Pee-wee and Little P are running down the street towards it, Max following close behind. I shout as loud as I can, "Max, get away from that thing." She can't hear me. With the overwhelming sounds of the screeching, the bellowing and the shaking earth, my voice is useless. The closer that thing gets, the worse it smells. I can't hold it in. I throw up in my mouth, but I can't hesitate. I swallow my vomit and take off in a mad sprint after them. I just have to catch up to Max and get her away from that thing. She's keeping pace with Little Pit, but he's managing to stay just out of her reach. Pee-wee trails closely behind Max. I'm closing the distance, but that monster is nearly upon them. Telephone poles and trees topple over as it walks by them. The parked cars lining the streets flatten under its feet. Cracks ripple across the street under the sheer weight of the behemoth. Little P comes to a halt. Pee-wee rushes ahead. Max catches up to Little P, lifting him into her arms. I finally catch up to them. The ground shakes again, nearly knocking us off our feet. A shadow creeps over us. We look up in horror. The monster is right in front of us. "Max, we have to go," I say, grabbing her by the arm. She's frozen with fear. I think that's their mom. She must have heard them screaming and come looking for her babies. "You have to let Little P go." Max looks down somberly and the creature in her arms. I can tell she doesn't want to let it go. "Just let him go," I repeat. The monster crouches down to look at us. Its head alone is bigger than my body. It could easily swallow a person whole. Its eyes fix upon Max. Max stares back at it. "It's for the best, Max. It's what he wants." "Okay," she says, kneeling down and setting Little P on the ground. Little P turns around and looks at Max. "Go home, Little P," she says. "Be good." Little P skitters away behind his mom. The monster's gaze drifts from Max and fixes upon me. It slowly opens its mouth, baring its teeth. It releases a thunderous roar so powerful it knocks us off our feet, sending us tumbling backwards. My body ricochets down the street, scraping across the asphalt until I come to a stop. Bloody and battered, I roll over onto my knees and look over at Max, laying in the street next to me. Her eyes are closed. She's not moving. I crawl over to Max and put my hands on her shoulders. "Max, get up," I plead. The monster steps towards us. Pee-wee runs out from behind it and dashes towards us. I scoop Max up in my arms and try to gather the strength to lift her, but my battered body fails me. They're closing in on us. Even if I could lift Max, there's no way I'd be able to outrun these creatures in my condition. I gently lay Max back down and step in front of her. "Go home," I shout at the behemoth. "You have your kids. Just leave." Shouting does no good, but there's little else I can do. I pick a stone off the ground and pelt it at the monster. Excruciating pain runs through my arm at the mere motion. The stone bounces right off its face. It continues forward, unflinching. I doubt it even felt that. I lean down to pick up another stone when Pee-wee jumps on me, knocking me to the ground. I struggle to hold him off as he tries to bite at me, his teeth inching towards my face. He hisses at me, or I thought he was hissing at me. His face is right in front of mine, but I can see now that that hissing didn't come from him. Lucy the handful strikes. Her fangs dig into Pee-wee's neck. She snaps back, hissing, preparing to strike again. Pee-wee jumps off of me and runs away screeching. Lucy chases after him. The behemoth's gaze drifts from me towards the screeching Pee-wee. It slowly turns and begins to follow its screeching child, Little P following behind. I lay on the ground, exhausted. I turn my head towards Max. She's still laying unmoving. I try to get to my feet, but can't even get to my knees. With what little strength I have, I slowly worm my way towards her. With each passing second, the screeching sounds further away. The shaking calms until it finally stops altogether. Everything is quiet. Finally, I reach Max. I flop over on the ground next to her. There's nothing I can do for her. Only watch and wait, hoping she'll wake up. I lay watching for minutes until her eyes flutter open. She's alive. She lifts her head and looks around confused. "What happened?" Max asks. It was Lucy, the words struggling to escape my mouth. She saved us. She kicked their asses. Where's Lucy now? Chasing them away, making sure they stay gone. After a long stay in the hospital, Max and I eventually make our way back home. Our house is in the same sorry state it was left in. We spend days cleaning up all the mess, sweeping up sand and glass, and throwing out any destroyed furniture that's beyond salvageable. Max is sweeping in the corner when she suddenly stops and looks down at something. What is it, Max? I ask. She leans down and picks it up. It's Plunky, she says. You found Plunky? Yeah, she replies. Let's all see if we have a tank to put him in. I search the closet and find a lone plastic container. It's rather small compared to his old terrarium, but at least he doesn't have to share it. We put some soil and a small water bowl in it and set him inside. The set'll have to do for now, Max says to Plunky. We set'll get you something better when we can. When we're finished cleaning, I sit on the edge of the bed and look across the house. It looks rather sparse and lonesome, without 100 animals inhabiting it. We take some time off work to recover and relocate. Our house was far too damaged and too sad to keep living in. Between the hospital bills and the cost of moving, money has been tight, so it's about time we headed back to work. Max is elbow deep in a bush, pulling vines out, when I come running up to her with my hands cupped together. Look what I found, I say. Max climbs out of the bush and turns around. What is it? She asks. I open my hands to reveal the critter inside. It's a little guy, I say. Forest Patrol. I worked as a highway patrol officer on a long forest route. It was a lonely that wound its way past a forested path. It was built back in the days when the region was heavily used for logging and mining, but now it was just a scenic route for people to take when they want to break away from their realities. My partner Mark and I would set up at a midway point to wait for a call or someone to ask for assistance or an emergency. It was usually crazies talking about aliens and the like, so we usually braced ourselves for the reports of people talking about how they saw Bigfoot crossing the road and how their cameras suddenly stopped working. It took a lot of patience to avoid getting angry and telling them to fuck right off, but we held our own and waved them away, saying we will check it out, only after we put in a report to let HQ know where we were. It helped as there were a couple of gas stations and towns that on the route also where we could get something to eat and avoid the madness. It was on one of these days when I almost died. Mark called sick, and I was alone. I decided to patrol the route to avoid getting bored, and while driving found 2 cars parked on the side of the road. It was not odd to see such an occurrence, but what was odd is that there were no people in or around the car. I parked my car near the pair, and decided to check if they needed any assistance. I radioed in the possible situation and the dispatch let me know that they will on. Call it turns into 1. I copied and continued to the cars. The first one looked abandoned, and the back passenger door was open. I looked in and saw the keys were still in the ignition. The car was pinging the warning for the open door, so whoever they were could not be far. I checked the second one and it was closed. I felt a sense of unease on account that there was no one around and walked to check the first car and found a bloodied handprint on the open door. I quickly radioed on a possible situation and was asked to wait for backup and emergency services. I complied with the order and stood at the front of the first car when I heard a scream from the woods. I unholstered my pistol and made my way to the edge of the forest slowly. I called out to anyone asking if they could respond. There was only silence, and I was beginning to sweat. It wasn't hot, but I could feel the fear creep up my spine. I waited at the edge of the woods and looked around hoping to see something. Another scream was heard and I left all caution and ran into the woods. I ran towards the sound and called out to the person asking them to hold on. I had no clue what was going on, but I wasn't about to let someone die on my watch. The scream came again, and I could feel I was getting closer. Just as I reached the source, the scream was cut off, like whoever was screaming suddenly stopped. I entered a clearing in the forest, and was immediately surrounded by the smell of rotten meat. I almost threw up at this. It was stronger than I had ever experienced. I checked the clearing to see where the source was, and all I could find was dead grass and branches. No clues as to where I was. I walked the perimeter with my left hand over my mouth to protect myself from the scents. I heard a rustling of leaves near me, and turned to check what it could be, and something flew out of the bushes and hit me in the leg. I fell back from the force. It was a spear of some sort, and I heard a cackling laugh from the woods. I tried to get up, but the pain from the wound held me down. I began to crawl backwards, and I gathered my strength and warned back up of whoever just attacked me. Another spear flew from the bushes and narrowly missed me. I took this opportunity and fired a few rounds at the origin area. I did not hear anything after the gunfire, so I felt like I missed the aggressor. Scared of what else could be out there, I tried to remove the spear and bind the wood. The pain from removing the jagged piece of wood was much worse than being hit by it, and I feared that I might have damaged a vein. I used my belt to stem the bleeding and tried to limp away from the clearing. I hear another cry, but this one was more aggressive and I could feel more eyes on me. Whoever it was in this place wanted me dead, and I could feel the anger. Just as I reached the edge of the clearing, someone jumped out of the bush to my right and fell on me. I could not make them out at first, so I tried to push them off while still holding onto the pistol. It was a woman, and she was crying. Her face was a mess of blood, snot, and saliva. I was too shaken at first, but once my senses returned, I tried to calm her and ask her what happened. As I was trying to do this, her face turned to the right and her eye grew large and she screamed. I turned to see a man emerge from the bush where I had shot. He was short at like 4 foot, but he had a larger head with a strong jaw, and I could see I had wounded him on his right shoulder and stomach. I could feel the rage emitting from his eyes as he roared at me and lunged forward. With no time to think, I lifted my pistol and fired off the remaining 2 rounds, hitting him on the leg, which caused him to drop. As he scrambled to stand up again, I grabbed the girl and tried to run for my car. I was hampered by my foot, but knew the man from the forest would be in the same situation. I heard another roar from the forest. This added the much-needed jolt of adrenaline in our rush to the car. I could not say anything but run. The sounds of pursuit were now audible, and the man was running. We cleared the woods and ran straight to my car, where she jumped into the passenger while I took the driver's side. The pain from my leg shot back and let out a scream. The girl was looking around frantically as I tried to get my senses back. She looked at the woods and began screaming out as the man emerged from the forest holding the bloodied spear. He threw it at the car, and it embedded itself in the back window. I tried to reload my pistol with shaky hands. The rounds fell from my hand, and just as I picked one up, I heard a roar of a rifle. I looked up and could see there was a patrol car in front of mine. They had just arrived and saw the man attacking my car. I tried to see what happened to him, but promptly lost consciousness due to the bleeding from the wound. When I came to, I was on stretcher being placed into an ambulance. I tried to speak but could not, and when I tried to raise my hand, I found that I was strapped onto the stretcher. It was 2 days later when I finally came to. In that time, my wound was treated, and I was moved to a private ward. I woke to find a suited man sitting on a chair near the window. He was reading the newspaper, and when he saw me, looked up and gave a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good to have you back, officer. Sorry to hear about your accident." "Accident? What accident? I was attacked by some crazy in the forest. What the fuck are you talking about?" "Look it this way. My superiors would like to keep that quiet, as these are things that are above our pay grade. Here is the situation. If you want to go public, by all means be my guest. That will lead to you being treated like the crazies you report a lot about while losing your job, and the other, you sign this paper saying that you were hit by an out-of-control car. That way you get your medical cover, continued employment, and finally retirement benefits. What you saw and experienced will be recorded and used to prevent other such unfortunate event from happening again." I signed the paper as I knew that these suits would ruin my life. I have since retired, and I'm living a quiet life away from civilization. I hope that this will reach someone who can expose what is actually happening in that wooded area. Squatter. Living in the middle of nowhere in rural northern Alabama has pros and cons. I'm not a hermit, despite what the local HOA thinks. I work a job, use modern technology, pay bills and taxes, etc. I simply prefer to live my life in solitude, surrounded by nature. My small cabin is buried up in the woods. The driveway is a little over a mile long. It's a small place. I don't need much room since it's just me and my 2 cats, Herbert and Ash. It's a simple 1-story house, 1 bed, 1 bath, a kitchen and living area, and a semi-large office space. The only other area is the large outdoor garage. The garage isn't connected to the house. In all honesty, it's a glorified car park with a really big shed that I use for storage and projects. Most of the time, I leave the building unlocked. There is nothing of value in the shed, the most valuable thing being an electric buzzsaw that cost me a pretty penny. The other reason I felt no need to lock it was because nobody ever came down my driveway. I'm in the middle of nowhere, so not many people drove past the driveway anyways, but the damn thing is over a mile long. I've learned there are very few people who want a driveway that long, let alone want to explore one. So when I heard some movement in the old shed, I just assumed it was a raccoon or a possum that had made its way into the building. Winter was on its way, and it made sense that the small critters would want shelter from the colder winds. I didn't let my cats out for a while, worried that they would get into the shed and get into trouble. A few weeks went by, and now and then I would hear some noises. Since the noises were so faint and far and few in between, I just didn't think much of it. A part of me wishes I had. I wish that I had investigated, maybe even kicked the critters out. But one afternoon, I had enough. When I got home and out of my car, I wanted nothing more than a strong gin and tonic. As I shut the car door, I noticed that the shed door was slightly ajar. Even though I left it unlocked, I was sure that I had shut the door. Fear crashed through me like a lightning bolt. My first thought was that Herbert and/or Ash had wandered outside and gotten into the shed. I briskly walked over to the shed and threw open the door, only to be met with a horrid sight. I was right, kind of. A small raccoon had gotten into my shed, but something else got into the poor critter. There was blood on the floor. I could see a large gash in the thing's side. Sunlight poured into the shed, turning the once cozy work shed into a fire-red orange that reminded me of Hell's Walls. Unfortunately, the raccoon wasn't the worst part of it. Standing along the back wall of the shed was a man. He was much taller than me, but he appeared to be thin and frail. I could see the outlines of his ribs. His arms resembled uncooked spaghetti noodles. He was so disproportionate. Another wave of fear and adrenaline surged through my veins. An unknown man was standing in my fucking shed, eating a raccoon. A part of me wanted to vomit. Another part of me wanted to turn and run. I felt rooted to the ground. My feet wouldn't respond to my commands. His head snapped in my direction, and he didn't waste a second. Lunging at me, I screamed. We fell to the floor, and I could feel his hands around my throat. I struggled against him, fearing for my life. I didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to go. I clawed at his hands, feeling my long nails puncture through his thin skin. Blood dribbled down his fingers and landed on my neck, the substance burning and heavy. My right hand fell to the side, reaching for a small handsaw that was sitting on the ground. I wasn't sure when or how it had ended up there, but that was the least of my concerns. I brought it up, slamming it into the man's arm. He let go, letting out a guttural scream. He shot away from my form as I rolled over and tried to catch my breath. Glancing up at him, I could see him grasping his arm and trying to catch his breath. His eyes were wild, panic, and fear written all over his face. I don't remember what happened. It's all a blur. I know that at some point I grabbed the handsaw once more, and then I was on top of him. There was blood. So much blood. And it was everywhere. He stopped screaming and stopped moving. And at some point I realized he was dead. The rest of the evening was a blur. I got up, adrenaline still racing its way through my system. I ended up in the bathroom of my home, washing the blood off my hands and scrubbing under my nails. Hyperventilating, the realization crashed into me that I had actually just killed a man. I vomited, emptying the nothing in my stomach into the toilet. I felt too disgusting. I felt horrid and vulnerable. I was on the floor, breathing fast and rapidly. Herbert came into the room at some point and shoved his head up against my thigh. Hours went by, and I hadn't moved from my spot on the bathroom floor. I had cried, had a panic attack, vomited 2 more times, and now I was just sitting here, numb. Herbert had fallen asleep a while ago. He seemed so peaceful. Ash had joined us. He brought his favorite tuna fishkin stuffed play toy and curled up next to Herbert. I just sat there, unsure of what to do. Was I supposed to call the cops? In Alabama, we had the self-defense laws, but I couldn't bring myself to move and pick up the phone. I certainly couldn't leave him there, either. I began to cry again, and at some point I fell asleep on my bathroom floor. I didn't go to work the next day, too concerned with what had occurred the previous evening. I decided against calling the cops. I was too afraid. I knew I had to find some way to get rid of the body, And when I saw a small bear running through my backyard, the perfect idea dawned on me. I wasn't sure why exactly the bear wasn't hibernating yet, but I didn't complain. 2 days after the ordeal, I got home and poured myself a drink. I took it with me to the shed, getting myself ready to do what I needed to do. Throwing open the shed door, and the body was disgusting. I nearly vomited again from the smell alone, but I pushed through. His skin was a blue color, and the blood around his body had dried up. I pushed on, grabbing one of his arms lightly. I was shaking as I grabbed the same hand. Saw I had originally stabbed him with, and began to cut off the arm. When it hit bone, that's when the tears started to fall. It was scary, trying to cut up a person, and I just couldn't get this stupid handsaw through his bones. I gave up. No, a better word is I got fed up. I was crying hot, angry tears as I grabbed his other arm and then pulled. He was heavy, the little muscle he had weighed heavy. I pulled him out of the shed door and threw the backying all the way to the edge of the woods. I left him there. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew that bear would be back. I wandered back inside slowly, Herbert brushing up against my legs as I entered the home. I washed my hands again, then decided that wasn't enough, so I showered. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I couldn't think, sleep, eat, drink, anything. I thought this would be easy, just dispose of him and get this over with. Sobbing quietly, I felt Herbert crawl up close to my head. Ash slept peacefully at the foot of the bed. The two of them were a stark contrast to my current feelings. I didn't know how to live with myself, knowing I had killed and squatter living in my shed. I work at the Brookside Nursing Home. Something is hunting me. It's been 3 hours. 3 hours trapped in this service closet, almost suffocating in this stale air. 3 hours, and the silence is deafening. I'm stuck, no way out. No hope of escape. Every inch of me is screaming, but I can't move. I can't run. All I can think about is her. That's all I can focus on now, and the terrifying realization that I'm not going to make it out. So here I am, writing this down, because if I don't leave something behind, something to prove I was here, who will know? Who will believe me? Let me start from the beginning. I've been working the night shift at Brookside Nursing Home for 2 months now. It's just a part-time gig to cover bills while I try to finish up nursing school. It should have been a simple job that had me assisting, checking on the elderly residents, making sure everything was running smoothly. But it didn't take long before I realized that Brookside wasn't a place where people just grew old and quiet. No, there was something else here. Something dark that seemed to pulse beneath the surface, hiding in the cracks of the walls and down into the floorboards. The place itself? It's everything you'd expect from a second-rate shit-can nursing home. Dim lighting, cracked flooring, the musty scent of antiseptic mixed with something older, and the residents. Most of them are barely conscious, their faces blank as they sit in front of TVs or drift off to sleep in their wheelchairs. A few get the occasional visitor, but it's rare. Too rare. But still, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the building, it was something darker. Like there was a presence, an energy that made the air thicker. Something sinister that clung to the walls. It felt as though the very ground beneath my feet was waiting for something, watching. And I didn't know what it was until I met it. Until I met her, Miss E. At first, I thought she was like any other resident, an elderly woman who needed help, someone whose body had failed her, leaving her at the mercy of strangers. I'd seen her around the halls, always moving. Miss E was a walker. She spent her days pacing up and down the narrow hallways, her worn slippers scraping against the floor. Her chart said it was a normal behavior, nothing to worry about, but it struck me as odd. She moved relentlessly, even when no one else was around. Day or night, Miss E was always walking. I didn't pay much attention at first. There was no reason to. She was one of the more self-sufficient residents, at least on the surface. But then the strange thing started. Little moments, small enough to brush off at first, but after a while, they became impossible to ignore. She'd pass by me in the hall, humming. At first, I thought it was just a mindless tune, the kind you hear from someone with dementia, but it wasn't like that. The melody was familiar, so familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was like it echoed through my memory, tugging at something deep inside me, something old. And then, it got worse. It wasn't just her humming anymore. It was a feeling, a constant presence, like there was always someone watching me, even when I couldn't see them. I couldn't shake the sensation. At first, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from, but then I realized it was Miss E. She would appear out of nowhere, standing in the shadows at the end of the hall, or just outside a resident's door, her eyes locked onto me. Her smile was unsettling and unnatural. It wasn't the warm, friendly kind that you'd expect from an old woman. No, this was different. It was sharp, like something twisted beneath her skin, pulling at her features. A grin that wasn't a grin at all. A smile that just didn't belong anywhere. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just her age, maybe some kind of condition that made her act off. That's what I convinced myself. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She never spoke to me, not in the first few weeks anyway. She would just watch, her eyes following me wherever I went. But one night while I was charting at the nurse's station, she came up to me, silent at first, but this time she didn't just watch. She whispered, her voice low and hoarse, like it hadn't been used in months. I steal the moments, I make them mine. The words echoed through the air, twisting through my thoughts. I steal the moments, I make them mine. I told myself it was just old age, that her mind was slipping, but deep down I knew it was something more. I couldn't shake the unease, the odd and unsettling sensation that something foul was crawling beneath the surface, waiting for me. So I did what anyone might do. I avoided her. I told myself I was just doing my job, trying to keep my distance from whatever was wrong with her. I stopped passing by her room, stopped acknowledging her. Someone else could deal with Miss E. I had enough on my plate. It felt justified. I really wasn't doing anything wrong. But whatever twisted thing had taken root in Brookside finally confronted me, face to face. And it wasn't just Miss E, it was something far worse. It happened tonight, on my last shift before my day off. I was finishing up some charts at the nurse's station, the low hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, when it hit me, a presence cold and palpable. My skin crawled, the hair on the back of my neck rising, prickling in fear. My heart pounded, and just as I started to turn, I heard it. A voice. Soft, raspy, distant but clear. Peekaboo. A cold shiver ran the length of my spine. I froze. The voice repeated itself. But now, something was off. It wasn't just any voice. It was her voice. My mother's voice. Peekaboo. I felt the world around me shudder, like the floor might actually open up and swallow me whole. My stomach twisted into a knot. My mother had been gone for almost an entire year. Cancer had taken her. There was no way it could be her. It was impossible. But then I saw her. Miss E. She was standing in the far corner of the room, her body so still it looked as though she were part of the shadows themselves. Her eyes were wide, too wide, staring at me with an intensity that felt like they could pierce my soul. And that smile, it was wrong. It twisted her face into something grotesque, something that shouldn't belong to a human. Her nostrils flared, and I could hear her breath, shallow and uneven, wheezing in and out of her nose. Then she spoke again, her lips curling upward, her voice sinking into a mocking sing-song tone. Yes, that was the game your mother used to play with you, wasn't that it? Do you remember how she stepped to pop her head out and say it just like that? My body went rigid. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream, to run, but my throat closed up. I couldn't speak a word. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was frozen. I tried to get up, to stand, to break free of the paralyzing terror wrapping around me. But that's when she moved. No, lunged. Her body shot toward me with unnatural speed, and before I could even react, her bony fingers were digging into the sides of my temples. Her nails felt like daggers, pressing into my skin as her crazed eyes locked onto mine, wide and hungry. Her yellow teeth gleamed in the dim light, strands of saliva hanging between them like a spider's web. I could feel her hot breath on my neck, the stench of something foul filling my nostrils. "Do you remember?" she whispered, her voice low and guttural, "how she kissed your forehead? Oh, so sweetly. You loved that, didn't you?" I couldn't breathe. It felt as if the world had narrowed to just her and I in this moment, this twisted and terrible moment. Suddenly, my body jerked into motion, my fight-or-flight instincts kicking in. I jumped up from the chair, heart pounding in my chest, gasping for air. Miss E collapsed to the floor, her body writhing as she burst into laughter. Laughter that was just wrong. It was ragged and frantic, like she couldn't catch her breath. The sound was horrendous, almost as if the air around us was being sucked away, leaving only that laugh to fill the space. Ha ha ha. A www.donsets want to play with mommy, darling. This wasn't normal. This wasn't anything even remotely realistic. This was supernatural in the truest sense of the word. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that could twist reality itself. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in under the weight of what I had just realized. That's when I looked down. What the fuck are you? Miss E rose to her feet with a slow, deliberate motion, her back arched as if she was stretching from a long slumber, and then she smiled, wide and full of malice. Her eyes flickered with anger. I'm not her, she hissed. I sit him what comes after. I am what takes. And in that moment it all clicked. I understood. She wasn't just a deranged old woman. She was a predator, some sort of entity that hunted in the space between life and death. My legs finally sprang to life. Every muscle in my body screamed to run. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I streaked down the dark corridors of Brookside, my heart pounding, the sound of her slippers shuffling behind me like a whisper from the grave. Every turn I took, every door I tried felt like a dead end, but I couldn't stop. I found the service closet and slammed the door behind me, locking it, my breath coming in and out in gasps. That was hours ago. I still hear the shuffling. It's closer now, almost like a heartbeat beating in the walls, in the air. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the vents. It's her. She's circling, waiting. I don't know if I'll get out. I don't know how long I can last in here. But if you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Don't come near Brookside. I don't care if it's the middle of the night or the middle of the day. Don't come, because I'm hiding from something far worse than you can imagine. Something that doesn't just want you to suffer, it wants to take everything from you. If I don't make it out, then let this be my warning. Stay far away, because she doesn't just want your body, she wants your soul. Have you ever been having the perfect dream? One where the world feels safe and kind for a moment, only to be jarred awake at the pinnacle of happiness by an alarm. You wake up melancholy, mourning a life you never lived. Then, back to the mental labor farm, spiders paying the flies to build their webs. That's how it felt when I received the phone call. I'm an introvert, and maybe not the best socially because of that. I stay to myself and keep only those I feel comfortable around in my life. That's why I was filled with dread, receiving a call from the ICF. My father is in. I didn't know much of my father, mostly just what my mother had to say. With the alcohol wearing her down to a shell of a human in my teens, she was practically lobotomized by the pain she felt. I wasn't understanding or mature enough at the time to rationalize what she was going through. Talking of my father was a hair trigger for a gun that only fired at its wielder, in my mother's case. His decline broke her. I suppose that's why she never let me visit him. He never was a father. He was an anomalous entity floating in the ether of my young imagination as a what-if. He was more akin to Santa or the devil in belief and presence in my life than a tangible parent. Now that she's gone, and I'm an adult, the reemergence of my father's existence weighed on me like a cancer diagnosis the same day as a pregnancy announcement. It wasn't fear per se, but to say I was nauseous would be an understatement. I felt as if a parasitic worm had burrowed its way through my intestines, 1 inch at a time, laying eggs, as it navigates my digestive tract. I barely remember the phone call, only snippets and blurs. I remember feelings and my automatic reactions to words, but not saying or hearing anything. Vaguely, it went something along the lines of, "Hi, is this Ryan?" "Yes, this is him. I'm your father's primary direct support professional. My name is Julie. Your father has taken a bit of a downturn in health recently. You may not be his guardian in a legal sense, but you are his next of kin. He requested you by name. He says a lot. Mostly incomplete, scattered thoughts, although he was very clear and adamant in regards to saying your name." From there I shut off, Mostly mooms and yas escaped my mouth like death row prisoners, scurrying past the guards only to be caught shortly after. I nodded a few times and had to clarify vocally that I understood because I forgot she couldn't see me. The words were masks for anxiety and apprehension, but all amounted to acknowledgments and yeses to her ears. I was too caught off guard to say anything else. The call ended. 11 a.m. Saturday, I whispered to myself, questioning how I managed to set a day and time without being consciously present. I may not know him other than slurred insults and teary-eyed shouting from my mother's recounting, but he was, what sees, my father. If he doesn't have much time left, I might as well honor his request. Since leaving school and graduating, time moved like reruns of a TV show out of order. Sure, I recognize the characters, but now I don't know where we are or what happened the last few months. You go to bed January 1st and wake up to hear it's already the end of April. Then, it's Halloween, and you have no plans. Oops, Christmas came, and you're behind on gifts. Oh, back to January 1st. Wait, was it still January this whole time? No, the year changed. 1 year older and still the same pay. That encapsulates the week leading up to seeing him. I worked and made small talk about my coworkers' kids or their new grill. I couldn't tell you much else. I woke up and it was Saturday at 7 a.m. I usually don't wake up until later, but sleep eluded me like the exit to a never-ending hallway. I was too anxious to eat, so my stomach grumbled, yelling at me to have some food. My throat filled with liquid fear, telling me anything I tried to eat would be promptly used to choke me with vomit. I sat there for hours, not knowing what to do to pass the time. 7:22. Wait, 22 minutes? That's how the next few hours remained, as I cycle through apps on my phone only to instinctively reopen them to the same post seconds later upon closing the app. I needed some water, my mouth was bone, and my tongue was sandpaper. The fridge was empty besides some expired milk. Had I forgotten to get groceries? This week really did fly by. The tap water came out brown at first. Not risking that. Better tell maintenance. Oh well, right? Not so bad. Almost time. I'll grab a water from the vending machine when I head out. 8:15 a.m. I guess I'll just lay here and close my eyes. Thoughts were both too fast all at once, and too slow to get to the point before my brain shifted to a new thought. 9 a.m. I'll just go early. Visiting hours aren't until 11, but it's an hour drive. I get down to the lobby of my complex and go to the vending machine for a bottle of water. The fluorescent light from the vending machine gave me a headache in the dimly lit charcoal room. Card reader out of order, said the folded over, poorly taped index card attached to the machine. I take the few crumpled bills I have out of my wallet. Each one is spit out. My dollar bills were discarded like bones from a constrictor's last meal. The outside was an overcast day, just as gray as prison walls. But above every person who decided to look up, I had a standoff with a car that couldn't decide if it wanted to let me cross or not. The traffic behind them honked and decided for them. I ended waiting on the entire line of cars before I could walk to our parking lot across the street. Orange vests and cones brightened up the scenery with their loud machinery and yelling working away at the potholes in the lot. They gave me dirty looks before I got into my beat-up car and pulled past them without reciprocating a look. The hour drive dragged on as I tried to navigate unfamiliar roads leading to a winding, complex parking lot. As I pulled in, I ignored the woman at the front desk and fast-tracked towards the water cooler. Fuck, I forgot to take my pills. The feeling of the heavy gulp and strange swallowing reminded me. I let her know who I stood to be visiting, and she gave me a smile so artificial you could preserve eggs for a year with it. Oh really? She squinted. I stood him sure he'd still be delighted to see you. Eventually, I was outside in a common room with tables, games, chairs, and a few televisions. Some heavier set and older patients strolled around in walkers. Most seemed to be in their rooms though. A woman in scrubs came out of a room with a few empty plastic cups, her brown hair folded around the back of her neck like arches in the way it curled. She was probably in her mid or early 30s and had a smile I could actually believe. Ryan, I'm Julie, one of your father's DSPs. Just so you know, I think I'm his favorite staff. She smirked and paused briefly. You look just like him. The nose and everything. She tilted her head slightly to the side. I broke my nose getting knocked over by a Great Dane and smacking my face on a brick wall when I was 9. My mom didn't like going to the doctor, so I never got it formally checked out. I snore pretty badly now. I told everyone at school that I broke it by fighting a 15-year-old. I won that fight. Well, that's what word around school would have been, if I had friends to share the story. Jolie's dark eyes bordered on black with an azure tint swirling in them like the color in a magic 8-ball. I felt safe, reassured at the very least. I'd hoped that someone in this line of work would have that effect. We talked, and she settled me down by asking me to sit at one of the circular tables in the middle of the room. It was covered in Uno cards, with 2 hands of cards laying scattered. Looks like someone was winning by quite a lot. An elderly man in a blue robe and checkered pajama pants scooted closer to her, mumbling just barely to Julie. Certainly not any volume I could understand. But she perked up, seeming to register his statement. "Lunch is at 12. Doug. You know this. Go on and get changed for the day, and it'll be lunch in no time." He grumbled slightly and spoke what I believed to be okay, but sounded more like a phlegmy exhale. She turned her attention back to me as more staff walked in from the hall, and another exited a bedroom with hands outstretched in gloves and a look of disgust on her face. After throwing the gloves off and vigorously washing her hands, she looked up at a clock ticking the time away with a sigh. For me, the clock sounded like the cracking of ice below my feet, counting down to the Arctic plunge that is my meeting with my father. What I hadn't noticed before now wouldn't leave my ears like a gunman in a standoff with police over a hostage. Click, click, chip, chip, crack. Ryan, click, click, Ryan. Ryan! I looked back, honing my attention back to the conversation. Long night? I nodded, sucking in my lips to not let more embarrassment slip out of my mouth. Your father is a sweet man when he's cognizant. I want you to be aware what you might see when in his room. He slips in and out of awareness and thrashes in bed from time to time. If he's not present with us mentally while we're in there, he'll be saying completely unrelated and detached things. Don't be worried. His eyesight has been degrading over time, and he's attached to a feeding tube in his stomach. He used to be able to eat, but if he has one of his episodes while eating, it could lead to aspiration. It's better to be on the safe side. Just talk calmly and ask questions. If he says something rude or out of line, he doesn't mean it. Does that sound okay? Her clinical delivery mismatched her initial aura of her comforting tone. Yeah, that's fine. Great. She smiled before dropping it to nod her head in acknowledgement with sympathetic eyes. Before I knew it, that door was open, and she was reassuring me that she'd be right outside the door if he or I needed anything. I don't know what I expected when I opened that door. I guess a sunken, hollow set of cheeks with speckled skin and a balding head. What I saw was indeed hollow physically and emotionally. He stared blankly off into space with his mouth half hung open, his teeth hidden by parched, dry lips. One eye had progressed with a glossy blue-white film further than the other. She wasn't kidding about his nose. It was freckled and drooping in age, but curved to the left at the bridge like a meandering stream. Just an aged-up version of mine. I looked at him with a grim admiration before being brought back down to earth, with the sharp vibrations of his voice rattling my eardrums, like the warning of a venomous snake. His voice was deeper than I assumed it'd be. Jew, lie? I felt disappointed, sad, and anxious to face this at all. As I was about to speak, I was interrupted. My son, Ryan. Is Ryan coming? He couldn't fully articulate my name, but the desperation and hope was evident in his voice. It's me, Dad. It's Ryan. He pulled his blanket higher up under his chin and shifted his lost gaze back and forth, caught off guard by my unfamiliar voice. Julie called me and said you wanted to see me. He settled and looked past me. I sat in the chair placed by his bedside. Ren, oh Ren, they told me to tell you. They told me to tell you. Oh, tell you. Tell you. He trailed off. He seemed saddened by his inability to remember. His demeanor shifted to solemnity. I don't remember. It was important. He looked like a disappointed child not being able to remember the fun fact he learned at school. He was sure his parents never could have known about dinosaurs. It's okay, Dad. Take your time. I'm sure you'll remember. I'll be here as long as you need me. I don't know if I was being honest or pretending to be kind. My mother's influence rubbed off on me, warping my perception like taffy in summer heat. How were the Johnsons? Is their boy gonna be a pilot still? He loved his airplanes. I don't know who they... Your mother didn't let you see me. The stark shift in the air around his words cut like a butcher into meat. Fast, hard, and deadly. I didn't do anything. It's not my fault. Cough. Cough. He looked like an old, worn-down man. He wasn't much older than my mother was. They may have had me later in life, but no man in his 50s should look this evaporated, this weak. At this stage, I wasn't seeing the limiting factor or reasons for her hatred, her need for total separation. He just seemed like a sick man whose body has been degraded by illness. That was what I saw at first. Then he froze. His body became like snapshots of still images playing in succession. It was like trying to catch the light moving frame by frame as you hit the switch to turn it on. He was a marionette moving in staccato, jarring spasms. His mouth hung open, and the blind eyes rolled back to hide any color that may have been left at that point. He started speaking. His voice was strained and stretched thin around the environment, around him like a glove that wouldn't quite fit. A black echo of death and wetness enveloped my ears. Elaine, Ila, the trees, the fire, run, ignore. Don't sipt look, can sipt save. Not animal, not alive. Mo, Sevier Kanku. His voice hitched in a high pitch. The breath held on as if it ended. It would never exist again. The lights flickered, afraid of what they illuminated. They returned to normal, as did he. I looked around expecting the world to react the same way my heart had, rushed, frantic, and clumsily. Nothing changed. The birds still chirped. The machine still beeped. No one came in. My father still looked past me. My mother's name isn't Elaine. Ryan, you look the same as the last day I saw you. He hadn't seen me since I was a toddler at most. The years are hazy from a time where memories are more suggestions of facts from another than reality. He still wasn't even looking 18-y. You got a haircut. Finally shaved that terrible mustache. Still the same, still my boy. He shot up to 90 degrees with no creak of the bed or shifting of bones. His movement was silent, a vacuum, a void of noise, moving as if incorporeal. He turned his head to the side and began to stand. I was too panicked and stunned by the sight before me to react. He walked with a divine purpose and intent. He could walk through brick, and the atoms would bend around him because they would be too afraid to disturb him. He walked to a table on the far side of the room, dragging his gastronomy tube and pump with him. The rolling device fell on him without a flinch from him, or a shift in demeanor. The tube pulled out of his stomach with an exhale of the balloon, and no reaction or wince. Gastric acid and feed lightly bubbled and stained the ground in a yellow-brown rain of disinterest. He systematically moved his limbs as if puppeted by God himself with robotic surgical precision. He could pick up a grain of rice with boxing gloves. He picked up a sheet of paper and began writing in it while maintaining a forward gaze to not look anywhere lest the world see him back. Upon finishing the writing, his body froze in military order and collapsed like a deflating balloon of meat and bones, a crumpling can in a hydraulic press. The caretakers and nurses began moving past me as my jaw lay on the floor. They maneuvered around it accordingly. I couldn't hear anything, but could feel the vibration of what would be sound if I could comprehend my senses. As they filed out to grab necessary equipment and moved his body to resuscitate him, my trance brought me to the note. My vision was a vignette with borders of my sight blackening to be hyper-vigilant of what lay in front of me. The red. Follow. Comsets. Below that was a brown, leather-bound journal. I didn't consider decision-making when my arm outstretched and shoved the journal into my pocket. Hours idled away, sitting in an ill-sized lobby chair. Julie came to me, the blue peeking through the black in her eyes, had shifted from day to night, snuffing out the sapphire light. I'm not supposed to be telling you this. She grasped my arm, clinging to it like the railing of a balcony. We don't know how this happened. His internal temperature elevated so high that his brain practically deformed and melted. His brain was cooked by his own body all at once. It was, she whispered. It was fucking flash fried in the time it took for him to make it across the room. He didn't have a fever. It wasn't slow cooking him, or detectable prior to this. It just happened. Her sorrow and disbelief came out in vocal skepticism and an unsteady pitch. Did he ever say anybody to you about a journal? I rushed past comforting her and jumped straight into selfish, gnawing curiosity. Did you know that squirrels gnawing on power lines are responsible for a large portion of power outages? My words cut through, and I saw the light shut off in her momentarily before warily answering. Yes, he used to write in one all the time. Before his sight went, he wrote in it every time after one of his episodes. I didn't want to invade his privacy, but he usually just mumbled the words he was screaming during the incidents as he wrote. He probably stopped writing in December. That's when he lost majority of his sight. So about 5 months ago. Thank you. The drive home was longer than prior. I don't remember any of it, so it might as well not have existed. I can't recall 1 second of it, not one car, red light, or any traffic. I only remember sitting in my lot. The construction workers were gone. Now that I think of it, I don't think I saw anyone out either. In the car, I flipped through the journal. Each page was all dated. Many pages were filled with scratchy writing that was hard to make out but legible. These weren't personal thoughts or a means to release emotions. They were all stories. These stories couldn't be his own, given what little I know about him. I flipped through further, and something caught my eye. The dates stemmed back years, but that wasn't the full extent of it. I got to December. It was only halfway through the journal. After that, the writing was clearer. Perfect penmanship. Perfectly spaced. Impeccable. The only clear distinction was that it only began after December. I'm gonna read the entries when I have more time. I'll share what I can in case anyone has a better idea or insight than I can provide. For now, I need some time to think. I need to share these thoughts with anyone who will listen. I can't shake the urge to write them down since I've gotten home. Dot's garden, my father Sip's grave. He brought us to Europe when I was still a girl, dragging his faith across the ocean like a rusted anchor. Like most lost children of the clergy, I endured the rituals of suffering, pressure, isolation, the slow burning resentment that settled in my bones like a second skeleton. My father was an old school pastor, fire and brimstone, no room for doubt, multiple sclerosis. My mother was never really part of the story. She died when I was 6. A faded photograph, a whisper in the hallway. By the time I turned 16, my father's punishment began. A disease that peels you apart, layer by layer, until you're just a prisoner in your own body. It started with tremors, then the stumbling, then the collapse. By the time I was 20, he was trapped. His arms were barely functional. Legs, useless. The only thing still alive in him was the pain. Doctors were useless. Pills only turned him into a drooling relic. Lightning spiders were crawling through his spine, grinding his bones to powder, screaming through his nerves like they were being peeled raw. We found one thing that worked, medical weed, but it was just a bandage on an open wound. A distraction, not a cure. The pain was always there, whispering in the back of his skull, a needle dragging slow across his nerves. It never stopped, so I took matters into my own hands. We built our first grow box together. I gutted old cabinets and lined them with reflective foil. Computer fans whirred inside like mechanical lungs, drawing breath through activated carbon filters. I rigged cheap LEDs at first, but the yield was garbage, so I saved up and upgraded to full-spectrum lights, thin beams of artificial sun, soaking the leaves in chemical love. Pre-war stone walls, towering ceilings, sunlight bleeding through the huge windows like a god's eye watching us sin. What started as medicine became a business. The apartment stank of earth and chlorophyll. No matter how many filters I burned through, we lived in a cathedral of illicit green, the mechanical hum of air pumps and circulation fans filling the silence between us. But the pain never really let me go. Parcel lockers became lifelines. A friend in sorting, a grease-slick rat with nicotine fingers and a taste for bribes kept things moving. Orders flowed, cash piled, and soon my father's pain became just another part of the daily routine. I tried psychedelics, searching for something bigger, something to break me open, let the rot spill out. Ego death turned out to be just another lie, a temporary trick. So I switched to morphine, smoothed out the edges. We stopped talking about God a long time ago. Our prayers were nothing more than purple haze and carbon filters. When we smoked, we played music on a Technics SL 1210 NK7, something I got as a down payment for a bigger delivery. We loved Nebraska LP, one of the few things left from the old country, a keepsake of my mother. I fucked strangers with forgettable faces, just to grind away the gnawing emptiness inside me. I couldn't stand being alone, but I hated them after the fact, so I always left before morning. Smoked Camel Blues on my walk home through Krakow's damp streets. My father was probably still sleeping. Maybe everything that dies someday comes back. I'd sing along with Bruce. I needed more money. I had to keep my father from losing everything, from sinking too deep into his ruined body. Time was shrinking, but the hunger for escape, that never stopped. And usually we'd fall asleep to the last somber notes of Reason to Believe. Then the vinyl crack came to an end. A plant that absorbed more than just light, that thrived in darkness, that bloomed under the right kind of pain. He mentioned the name once, something archaic and alchemical, but all I remembered was that it sounded ridiculous. Then I heard about it. My seed supplier told me in a hushed, feverish voice. A mutation. A mistake. Like a snake oil remedy, peddled by some back alley mystic. It's a cross between Chemdog and Quirkle, he said, eyes darting like a rat's. Hits both the body and the mind. The perfect hybrid. But this is different. This shit was marinated. The seeds soaked in a special LSD solution. You won't find it anywhere else. This strain doesn't just get you high, it restructures you, makes you new. You need to do it right. Blood in the soil, male seed in the dirt. It sips part of the process. Fucking junkie nonsense. His teeth were rotting in real time, and he kept licking at the sores on his lips. I barely listened, but then he said something else, something even more absurd. I stared at him. "You still fucking serious?" He grinned, a mouthful of nicotine and decay. Dead fucking serious. And just like that, he left. Said the next drop would be in 3 months, went into the alleyway like he had never been there at all. Then my father had another stroke. I laughed about it at first. The whole thing felt like a fever dream, the kind of thing you only half remember after a 3-day bender. Worse this time, his whole right side locked up, his face twisting in a way that barely looked human. His body shook, veins screaming under his paper-thin skin, and all I could do was hold him down until it passed. He pissed himself, his breath wheezing in and out like something caught in a drain. Desperation makes you do things. Things you swore you wouldn't. Became too regular, too violent. I found some guy, someone with forgettable eyes, and the kind of body you don't even pretend to want. It didn't matter. We fucked in the car behind the place, my hands gripping cold handle, the stench of beer and cigarettes thick in the air. When it was over, I took the condom and left him there, half-dressed, still trying to remember my name. At home I laid everything out. The seeds, black and swollen, like something calcified in a corpse's gut. A deep ceramic pot filled with a mixture I had perfected over the years. Perlite, peat moss, and worm castings for richness. The usual routine. But this time I added the blood. I bit down on my wrist until I tasted iron, let the droplets spatter onto the soil like rain. Then I tore open the condom, squeezing out the pale offering, mixing it in with my fingers. It felt obscene. Sacrilegious. I planted the seeds, watered them, set up the grow lights, 600 WLEDs, full spectrum, adjusted for vegetative growth. It felt right. Circulation fans placed at strategic angles, and humidity hovering around 65%. The first sprouts emerged within days, their leaves dark, waxy, almost wet-looking. Something about them made my skin itch. I couldn't stop watching them grow. He told me to get out, to find something else. A life waiting somewhere beyond these 4 walls, already soaked in the excess of THC and resignation. But the truth? I couldn't imagine life without him. The only constant, the only weight keeping me from floating into nothing. He was abandoned by everything. His love, his faith, his God, but not by me. Usual 2 to 3 week routine, but this time it felt faster, like time was bending, slipping through my fingers in a way I couldn't hold on to. I tried to keep my father in higher spirits. We talked more about the future, about what I wanted. So I had to find a way out. For him, for us. I left him dozing on the couch, curled into himself like a husk, and went to check the grow. He had already told me it was different, that it was something else, but he couldn't explain why. That night, We listened to the Contino sessions. Dirge came on first, the drugged-out la-la-las drifting, reverberating through the apartment like a half-forgotten prayer, looping in the cavern of our concrete garden. It felt holy in a way nothing else did anymore. The Thing at the End of Main Street, Night 1, Friday. I'd been having trouble sleeping in my new apartment. After years of hard work, I finally landed a job that pays well enough for a nice place downtown, a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment on the 3rd floor. I've been dreaming of this for so long, and now that I'm here, I should feel accomplished. Instead, I feel unsettled. The apartment is fully furnished. My television sits on my new dresser. Outside, the first night of spring is crisp, and my large window overlooks Main Street, letting in the glow of street lights and neon signs. To relax, I put on my comfort show, Grey's Anatomy. The clock reads 10:30 p.m. I figure I can get through a few episodes before bed. When I check the time again, it's 1:45 a.m. I'm still wide awake, but my TV is off. Strange. I don't remember turning it off. The city outside is still alive. Cars passing, laughter, the occasional clatter of something falling over. I decide to take a look. From my window, I have a clear view straight down Crowley Street. My apartment sits at the intersection of Main and Lewis, like the center bar of a capital H. Across the street, a couple stumbles out of a bar, calling for a cab. Further down, a group of college students leaves another bar, their voices loud and carefree. I open my window to let the night air in. I don't know why I suddenly feel the urge to people watch, but here I am, sitting at my desk, observing the street below. Then I see it. At the far end of the street, a figure, too far to make out any details, but something about it sends a chill down my spine. I tell myself it's just a shadow or a trick of the light, but when I glance back, the figure hasn't moved. No, that's not right. It has moved just slightly, and it's facing me. I let out a small gasp, heart pounding. The blinds are down but slightly open, just enough for me to see out without anyone seeing it. Even so, I feel watched. I slam the window shut, pull the blinds closed, and force myself into bed, trying to push the image out of my mind. Night 2, Saturday. I'm out with friends at the bar I saw last night. The memory of the figure has faded into the background, replaced by drinks, laughter, and music. By 11:30 p.m., I'm ready to call it a night. I offer my apartment to anyone who wants to crash, but everyone declines. As I cross the street to my building, an eerie sensation creeps over me. The feeling of being watched. I pause, glance over my shoulder. Nothing. I hurry inside, locking the door behind me. My nightly routine is almost automatic now. Change, brush my teeth, turn on Netflix. Grey's Anatomy plays as I settle in, waiting for sleep to take over. Then a noise outside. I glance at the clock, 1:45 a.m. Pushing aside my hesitation, I walk to the window and peek through the blinds. The same homeless man with a shopping cart is there. Just like last night, a drunken couple stumbles toward Crowley Street. And then, the figure. It's closer this time. My breath catches. The figure isn't just a shadow, it's a shape, a humanoid mass, flickering like old TV static. It doesn't move. Yet I know it sees me. I can't explain how, but I feel its gaze. I check the people walking nearby. No one reacts. No one even seems aware of it. The figure lingers for a moment, before slowly floating back into the alley, vanishing from sight. Night 3, Sunday. I convince my friend Bernie to stay the night. "You were so excited about this place," he reminds me. "You waited for this since college. You loved the location, the view, and now you scared of the dark." I don't argue. I just need someone else to be here. We watch a movie in the living room, and I make him promise to stay awake until 1:45 a.m. I check the clock religiously. 9:30, 9:45, 10:25, 11 o'clock, 12:10, 1:12. When it finally hits 1:45, I nudge Bernie awake and pull him to the window. At first, there's nothing. Then, out of the alley, the figure emerges. It's closer, only half a block away now. The static effect is fading, replaced by faint features, like a signal coming into focus. I point. "There, do you see it?" Bernie squints. See what? He sees nothing, but I do. And then at the edge of my vision, I notice something else. The homeless man, he's frozen in place, staring down the street. His face is locked in an expression of pure terror. He sees it too. At 1:50, the figure vanishes again. Night 4, Monday. I go to a 24-hour diner at the corner of Crowley and Main, determined to get answers. I order a milkshake and watch the window. At 1:30 a.m., I brace myself. Any minute now, it'll appear. But before I see anything, there's a loud crash. The homeless man Simon, as the cook calls him, has dropped a bag of cans. He looks rattled. I get up to talk to him, but then, beep. My watch hits 1:45 a.m. I whip around to the alley. Nothing. I turn back, nearly jumping out of my skin. Simon is sitting right in front of me, silent, staring. You saw that thing too, I whisper. Simon doesn't said answer. He just stands and leaves. That night I sleep soundly. But below in the street, the figure has moved even closer. It's almost fully human now. Night 5, Tuesday. I invite my friends over for a late housewarming party. Taco Tuesday, drinks, Cards Against Humanity. Everything feels normal again. Until Bernie brings it up. He was shaking the other night, he tells everyone. Said someone was outside his window. It's nothing, I lied, but my watch beeps. 1:45. And just like before, I start trembling. Bernie notices. Yeah, that happened the other night too. Fine, I say. Follow me. We go to the window. I see it immediately. It's right below us. Frozen in fear, I realize it doesn't look like a shadow anymore. It looks like a person. Greg, Greg. My friends call my name, trying to pull me out of my trance. I break free, gasping. My nose is bleeding. Bernie shrugs. I stepped him going home. Then Naomi screams. Don't stit, open the door. A crash outside. A high-pitched, inhuman screech. And then silence. Night 6, Wednesday. Naomi stayed. She demands answers. A knock at the door interrupts us. I step in front of her, peering through the peephole. It's Simon. I hesitate before opening it. Hello? Simon steps inside like he belongs there. His orange shirt is riddled with holes. His jeans caked in grime. The stench is overwhelming. Naomi backs away. Simon meets my eyes. You saw it, he says. I swallow hard. Yes. What is it? Simon's expression darkens. You don't set want to know. Before I could ask more of a demand, my watch beeps. 1:45 a.m. Confused how 5 hours had passed, we all make our way to the window. We all look and look. Then Naomi says there. The thing looked, I tremble, like me. Naomi looks at me, then Simon, and then down. The thing is moving not a way up. We close the blinds in a panic dot, then a knock at the door. I'm a DIY electronics content creator. I went to a meetup and something terrible happened, and I need to share. I don't know what to do. I recently had a really bad experience, and I need to share about it. I've been attending various DIY electronics meetups for many years. My personal specialty is finding interesting new ways to use LEDs, but I love to share anything involving electronics, especially if I've never seen it before. People will work on their pet project for years, and it can be something so strange and special. I recently posted a video of a lady who made a robot that juggles ping pong balls, which didn't quite work. She'd been working on it for almost 5 years. I love interviewing people like this and sharing it. This time, however, I cannot post any footage of what I saw. I can't stop thinking about it though. I don't know what else to say, but that I'm losing my mind and I need help. I have to tell someone. I was going to a conference on the other side of the country to film attendees for an upcoming video series that I'm working on. I went to the library to print out some imagery for my interviews, and a flyer on a corkboard in restroom corridor caught my attention. It said that that night there was going to be an electronics hobbyist meetup. They were working on super cool LED perceptual visual interface sci-fi tech, and they wanted collaborators and volunteers. There was a picture of a dog wearing a virtual reality headset. It looked really innocent, like it was probably made by high school students, which, to be honest, usually means it's a different version of a project I've seen many times before. However, the phrase perceptual visual interface was just odd, and something about the flyer made me feel like this might be a novel DIY project, or at least a good interview. I took down the address and looked it up on my phone. It looked like a warehouse. I went back to the conference and honestly had a really good day of filming, and then I went and got some dinner, and then I drove to the address from the flyer. I drove to a part of the city that was really run down. A lot of the streets had abandoned houses, and I saw a lot of graffiti. I don't really like taking my expensive camera and microphone to places like this, but I hoped that I would end up someplace that I would feel comfortable, so I kept going. I found the warehouse. There were no people anywhere. The building was old, and it looked like it hadn't been used for years. I decided to leave my gear hidden under my jacket in the car until after I found where I was going. Then I decided that I wanted a more journalistic aesthetic that I'd been cultivating, so I put my audio recorder in my pocket, just in case I wanted to get some audio to play over other footage. I didn't know where to go at first, but I found a steel security door on the side that was just open, and I walked in. Inside, it was big and dark and dirty. I would have turned around and left right then, but I heard a voice. "Hey, you're new, who are you?" I didn't see anyone, but then I noticed a really old webcam just sitting on the floor, the kind that was a little white plastic ball, almost like a weird eyeball. Next to it was a really old desktop computer speaker, and a tiny cheap microphone on a stand. If I had found these items at a thrift store, I might have bought them for a couple dollars just because they were almost antiques. "Hi, my name's Simon. I saw your flyer. I'm a guy from out of town who likes electronics meetups, and I wanted to check this out." "Cool," the speaker said. "Head on back." I looked around. "Back," the voice said. "You'll find us." I started walking. I noticed that there was a black box up ahead. As I got closer, I saw that it was an area the size of a room draped off with black sheets that were taped together. Facing me, I saw another webcam clipped to the rod at the top, and a handwritten sign that said, "Go around." Behind the sign, I found a couple people just standing there. "Hey, you're new," one of them said. He was a thin man with glasses. He smiled and extended his hand. "I'm James." "Hi, I'm Tabitha," said the other person, who was a lady who was dressed somewhat professionally. They both looked like nice people. "Hi, I'm Simon. Are you the person who posted the flare?" "No, we're just attendees," James said. "Is that person here?" "I think so. I don't know," he said, and shrugged. Tabitha shrugged too. "Well, I mean, if it's a meetup, they should be here, right? Do you have any electronics projects to share?" "I did, at first," he said. "Yeah, I originally came to share some stuff I was working on." "Yeah, I guess I did too. Gosh, that was a while ago, and we didn't know each other at all," Tabitha said, and they both laughed nervously. I was feeling pretty confused. "And now we're friends," James said. "Well, more than friends." He and Tabitha smiled knowingly at each other. "If you don't have projects, and they're not here, then how is this a DIY meetup?" Simon smiled and crossed his arms. "You'll see. Just hang on. It's back there behind the black sheets. You can look eventually, when you're ready," James replied. "We've been trying to get another person for a while." Tabitha said, "We're so excited that you're here." Then I heard something. It sounded like a small motor. "Here it comes," Tabitha said. There was another webcam and microphone attached to the upper rod on this side of the black room as well, peering down at them. Below it, at the ground, a remote-controlled car came out from a mouse hole in the black room. It rolled up to us and stopped. On it sat 3 items that looked like small VR headsets. I picked one of them up. It was attached to a wire that ran back to the black room. It was an old pair of the kind of cheap boxy sunglasses that fit over regular glasses. On the inside, I saw that there were a lot of tiny surface mount LEDs glued around the inside of the lens frames. "What are they?" "Pure bliss," Tabitha said. "You've never ever felt anything like this, Simon." "You are in for the experience of a lifetime, Simon," said James. "This feels better than anything you have ever or could ever feel. It changed my life." "Yeah," Tabitha said. "I've been thinking about this for weeks. I keep looking for the flyers, hoping there'd be another session. We should start." I was feeling apprehensive. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. James and Tabitha were smiling, but I felt like they were too excited about this. Before I put these on, I think I need to know more about this. I came here to interview people who are making electronics. They won't start until all of us put them on. Tabitha said, "Just trust us." She smiled again, but it wasn't exactly a happy face. "I don't want to, Simon," James said. "Listen to me. This is the most incredible thing you'll ever experience. It's going to change the world. I don't care about the rest of my life anymore, honestly. Nothing else really matters once you try this. But you have to put it on. Whoever is doing this, whoever made these, they won't start it until we all put them on, and if you leave, they won't run it. I don't want to have to say this, but now that you're here, you have to do this." "Gosh," Tabitha said. "I don't want to tell you. I really don't want to tell anyone what to do. It's not like me. I'm not normally like this, Simon. I swear, but James is right. Now that you're here, we have to all do this together, or they won't start it. Please, Simon." "I'm not comfortable with this," I said. At this point, honestly, I was afraid. I decided that I needed to leave. "Please, Simon, please." James fell to his knees on the dirty warehouse floor. "Simon, please." Tabitha was wearing a nice-looking green skirt. She looked like my high school chemistry teacher. She also got on her knees. "Simon, please. Trust us, Simon. This is the best, the greatest thing." James grabbed my free hand. "Simon." His eyes were crazy. I dropped the glasses. "Simon, be careful." Tabitha screamed. She lunged for my glasses, crawling across the filthy floor. "Are they broken?" James asked. No, they're fine. Simon, be careful. You can't do that. If anything goes wrong, they won't start it." "I'm leaving," I said. I pulled my hand away and started walking out. "Simon, stop." James yelled after me. "Stop right now, Simon." I started to run. "Stop, stop, stop." Tabitha screamed. I was running for the open door. Suddenly I heard a loud bang. I turned and looked. James was pointing a gun at me. "Stop," he screamed. I froze. "Stay right there." He kept the gun trained on me as he ran over. I felt so afraid that I was cold, and I started to shake uncontrollably. "Come with me. Walk." I took a step forward, and he circled around behind me. "Forward, go, that's it." I started walking. "Go left, towards the back left corner over there." I started to cry. I was shaking badly, but I did my best to walk steadily where he said. "I didn't want to do this, Simon, but I have to show you." Tabitha came up and walked alongside me. "Listen, Simon, if someone leaves, then they won't start it. So if someone comes, and they are stupid, so stupid, and they refuse to put on the glasses with us, then we can't start. So we have to do something about it. Coming here, and then not having the experience, it hurts, Simon. It hurts so bad, so we had to find a way to make sure it happens. It's awful, but we'll show you. And then you'll see that you need to join us in the experience. You won't regret it, Simon." "You know, I'm really just a normal guy. We're both normal people who first met here to work on electronics," James said. He continued. "But this has changed me. It's really worth this, worth everything. It's like the sun is in your heart. It's the most tranquil, beautiful feeling. After the first time, I tried everything. I mixed street drugs with anesthetics and psychedelics and sex and anything I could think of. Nothing else even comes close. It's holy," Tabitha said. "It's my religion now." "Yeah," James said. "That's kind of a good way to put it. I don't know, maybe if I meditated for decades I could get there?" "I doubt it," Tabitha said. We were approaching a doorway to a smaller room. I began to notice a really bad smell. "Okay, Simon, listen," James said. "I don't want you to freak out. I just want you to see that we're serious. We're just gonna look, okay? You see, you weren't the first person who came here and didn't want to join in. Stay calm, Tabitha said. We approached the doorway, and I looked inside. It was a smaller room. On the floor, I saw figures. Looking closer, I clearly saw that one of them was a bloated corpse with maggots on the face. The smell coming from the room was vile, overwhelming. "Okay, Simon, Let's turn and walk back. Listen carefully and stay calm. Don't run. Let's just walk back to the glasses, okay? I turned to the right and started to walk back towards the black room, to the glasses. Don't run. Just listen to me and stay calm. Those are people. I mean, they were people. Those were people who came here, and they just wouldn't listen. Those are 4 people who I shot. I killed them with this gun. I did that because if they came and left without joining us, then the experience wouldn't start, Simon. They won't start it if anyone leaves. But if they die, then Tabitha and I still get to have the experience. I killed them because that's how important this is, Simon. You understand, Simon? We're normal, everyday people, Tabitha and me. You get that, right? But this is just that important. So now that you know that, now you're gonna join us, okay? Okay, I said. You're doing really good, Simon. I met James here, and we haven't found anyone else yet. I wish there was another way to do this. You said you're a visitor, right? James said. I guess you're gonna have to move here after this. Tabitha laughed. I'm so happy we're about to start. Tabitha said. I'm not a fighter. I've never been in a fight, and frankly, I have no idea how to fight at all. If I ever had to fist fight, I'd probably get destroyed. But something came over me. I didn't even think. It just happened. And if it had gone slightly wrong, I'm sure I'd be dead. I pulled the audio recorder out of my pocket, and I spun around and threw it at James. It hit him right in the head, and he almost fell over. Then I ran up and I kicked him in the stomach, and he fell over. Then I turned and pushed Tabitha over as hard as I could. Then I turned and I kicked James in the head as hard as I could. Then I turned and I ran as fast as I have ever run in my life for the door to the outside. I heard Tabitha screaming. Thinking of action movies, I started jumping left and right as I ran. I heard the gunfire. Then I got to the door and I was outside, and I got in my car and I started it and I started driving. I drove off the curb and I hit the median berm and I just kept going. I drove away at freeway speed. I kept going until I was in a normal part of town. I actually ran a couple stop signs, but no one noticed. I kept looking behind me and I was sure no one was following me, but I drove back to the airport. I had been crying the entire time, but I didn't care. I just wiped off my face and I returned the car and I got a flight and I left. I haven't told anyone because I'm afraid. I don't know who made those glasses, or if they know who I am, or anything about them. I've gone back over what happened 1,000 times in my head. I don't feel bad about anything I did. I don't care how badly I hurt James, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. Overall, it doesn't make any sense, but I have to tell someone, even if it's risky, because I don't know what to do anymore. If the audio recorder is working, then someone could figure out who I am from that. I have literally hundreds of videos online. I'm all over the internet. I do things to hide my identity, but I'm sure it's not perfect. I can't even make myself go outside anymore. I keep looking out my window thinking someone's going to come to my home when I'm asleep or something. I don't know what was behind the black curtain, who or what they are, or what they can do. Obviously the flyer was designed to look innocent, so there's no clues there. It could be one person, or a company, or an entire government. I have no way of knowing. I don't know if they care or not. I don't know anything. It's just a black box. What should I do? That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.